The sun rose over Salvation Creek the way it always did, indifferent, relentless, painting the Texas borderland in shades of amber and rust. Sheriff Elias Crow stood on the porch of his office, watching the light creep across the weathered buildings of a town that barely qualified as one. 23 souls called this place home, and he knew every name, every face, every secret they thought they'd buried. He didn't wear a gun. This fact bothered Deputy Marshal Hayes more than anything else about his superior officer. Hayes stood beside him now, thumbs hooked in his belt, the weight of his Colt Navy revolver pulling at his hip. "Storm's coming," Hayes muttered, squinting at the horizon where dark clouds gathered like an invading army. Elias nodded, but his attention wasn't on the weather. 3 riders were approaching from the south, their silhouettes wavering in the heat shimmer. Too deliberate to be drifters, too slow to be running from something. "That's trouble," Hayes said, his hand drifting toward his weapon. "Everything's trouble to you, Marshal." Elias's voice carried the rough warmth of a man who'd learned to diffuse tension before it ignited. "Let's see what they want first." The riders drew closer, and Elias could make out details now, dusters caked with trail dust, hats pulled low, horses that looked like they'd been ridden hard and often. The man in the center sat taller than the others, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. They stopped 30 feet from the porch. The center rider pushed back his hat, revealing a face that belonged in a penny dreadful. Sharp features, cold eyes the color of dirty ice, a smile that suggested he found the world's suffering endlessly amusing. "Morning, Sheriff." His voice was surprisingly cultured, touched with an accent Elias couldn't quite place. Eastern educated, maybe, which made him more dangerous, not less. "Name's Ronan Vance. My associates and I have been on the trail for some time. We're looking for supplies, and your town seems accommodating." Elias descended the steps slowly, keeping his hands visible and relaxed. "We've got a general store. Dutch Williams will see you right, long as your money's good and your manners hold." Vance's smile widened. "No gun, Sheriff? That's either very brave or very stupid." "It's neither. It's just a choice." Elias stopped 10 feet from the horses, maintaining what he hoped was a respectful but firm distance. Violence has a way of multiplying itself. Every bullet fired demands another in return. I prefer conversation. A philosopher lawman. Vance looked genuinely delighted. How refreshing. "Tell me, Sheriff, has your philosophy ever been tested? Truly tested?" Before Elias could answer, a woman's scream shattered the morning quiet. The sound came from the direction of the schoolhouse, a one-room structure where Elias's wife, Clara, taught reading and arithmetic to the town's handful of children. His son, Thomas, would be there too. 8 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with drawing horses in the margins of his slate. Elias ran. Behind him, he heard Hayes shouting something, heard boots hitting dirt, but the blood was already roaring in his ears. The schoolhouse was 200 yards away. He covered the distance in what felt like both seconds and hours, his lungs burning, his mind refusing to process what the scream might mean. The door hung open. He burst through. The silence inside was worse than the scream had been. Clara lay near her desk, her blue dress darkened with spreading crimson. Her eyes found his, still alive, still conscious, and in them he saw a mixture of pain and desperate urgency. She tried to speak, her lips forming a word, "Thomas," but no sound came. Elias dropped to his knees beside her, his hands moving uselessly over the wound in her chest. "Don't talk. Don't. Marshal, get Doc Brennan, now." But even as he said it, he knew. The wound was too deep, the blood flowing too freely. Her hand found his, squeezed with fading strength, and her eyes moved past him to the far corner of the room. That's when he saw his son. Thomas lay crumpled against the wall like a discarded puppet, his small body utterly still, a red flower blooming on his white shirt. His eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing, seeing nothing, being nothing anymore. Something inside Elias Crow broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. He heard himself making sounds, animal sounds, inhuman sounds. As he crawled to Thomas, gathered the small body in his arms, felt the terrible lightness of a life ended too soon. Behind him, Claire's breathing changed, became wet and ragged, then stopped entirely. Hayes appeared in the doorway, took one look, and immediately spun back outside. Elias heard him retching. Footsteps approached, multiple sets. Through the haze of his shock, Elias became aware of Ronan Vance standing in the doorway, surveying the carnage with the detached interest of a man examining livestock. "Tragic," Vance said softly. "Truly. My associate, the gentleman outside who is currently bleeding from a rather unfortunate head wound, got a bit overzealous when your lovely wife tried to prevent us from taking the school's modest cash box. Self-defense, you understand. The law recognizes such things." Elias stood slowly, still holding Thomas, his body operating on pure instinct now. "You did this." "I did nothing. Arlo got spooked. The woman reached for something, maybe a weapon, who can say? And he reacted. The boy?" Vance shrugged. "Wrong place, wrong time. The frontier is unforgiving, Sheriff. Surely your philosophy accounts for such tragedies." Hayes had returned, his face gray, his hand on his pistol. "Boss, let me—" "No." Elias's voice sounded strange even to himself, hollow and distant. He gently laid Thomas beside Clara, arranging them as if they were merely sleeping. When he stood and faced Vance, something in his expression made the outlaw's smile falter. "You're going to hang for this," Elias said quietly. Vance's confidence returned. "On what evidence? Your deputy was blocks away. You were on your porch. There were no witnesses except a dead woman and a dead child, and the dead sheriff make very poor witnesses indeed." He tipped his hat. "We'll be leaving now. Do try to remember your philosophy about violence. It would be a shame to add your corpse to today's tally." The three riders left Salvation Creek at a leisurely pace, Vance humming a tune that drifted back on the wind. Elias stood in the schoolhouse, surrounded by the ruins of his world, and felt the last of his old self die with his family. The town held a funeral the next day. 21 people attended, everyone except Dutch Williams, who was too drunk to stand, and Mrs. Brennan, who was helping her husband tend to the aftermath of grief in the form of sedatives and whispered condolences. Reverend Thaddeus spoke words meant to provide comfort, but Elias heard none of them. He stood at the edge of the graves, two rectangular wounds in the earth that would never heal, and felt nothing at all. The absence of feeling was somehow worse than pain. After the others left, he remained. Hayes tried to pull him away once, got a look at Elias's face, and backed off without another word. Night fell. Elias sat between the graves, his back against the marker he'd carved himself. Clara Crow, beloved wife and mother. Thomas Crow, taken too soon. The marker for Thomas included a horse, crude, uneven, but recognizable. His son would have appreciated that. "Boss?" Elias looked up. Hayes stood there with a lantern, the light casting strange shadows across his weathered face. "You've been out here 14 hours, the deputy said. "You need to eat, sleep, something." "He's right, you know." The voice came from behind Hayes, surprising them both. A woman emerged from the darkness, mid-30s, Mexican features, dressed in trail clothes that had seen better years. She carried herself like someone accustomed to trouble. "A man dies just as dead from grief as from a bullet, and it takes longer." Hayes's hand went to his gun. "Who the hell are you?" "Marisol Vega." She stopped at a respectful distance, her hands visible and empty. "I was tracking Ronan Vance and his men, lost them near the border, picked up their trail again heading north. Seems I arrived a day too late." Her eyes moved to the graves. "I'm sorry for your loss, Sheriff." Elias's voice came out rough, unused. "You know Vance?" "I know what he is. I know he's killed at least 17 people that I can prove, probably 3 times that many I can't. I know he robs and murders his way across both sides of the border, and I know the law can't touch him because he's too smart to leave witnesses." She paused. "Mostly." "Why are you hunting him?" Something flickered across Marisol's face. Old pain, carefully controlled. "He killed my brother, 18 months ago, in Monterey. Raul was a merchant, successful, had a beautiful family. Vance and his crew robbed his store, killed him when he tried to protect his wife. They let her live. She took her own life 3 months later." Marisol's voice remained steady, but her hands clenched. "I've been following him ever since." Hayes holstered his weapon slowly. "You law?" "I was. Rurales, until I decided I cared more about justice than jurisdiction. She looked at Elias. I heard what happened. Heard about your philosophy. Heard that even now, after everything, you're not carrying a gun. Elias stood, his joints protesting from hours of stillness. I'm not. Then what are you planning to do? Write him a strongly worded letter? Appeal to his better nature? Marisol's tone wasn't mocking. She sounded genuinely curious. I'm going to bring him back, Elias said simply. Alive to stand trial. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind moving through the scrub grass. Hayes found his voice first. Boss, that's suicide. You heard what the lady said. Vance has been doing this for years. He's not some drunk cowboy who got in over his head. He's smart, he's vicious, and he's got a crew that would kill their own mothers for $1. Which is why it has to be done right. Elias looked at his deputy, really looked at him for the first time since the schoolhouse. The law failed here, Marshal. It failed Clara, failed Thomas, failed everything I believed in. But that doesn't mean I abandon it. It means I prove it can still work, even in the worst circumstances. Marisol shook her head slowly. You're talking about crossing into Mexico, into territory where American law means nothing, where a badge is just a target on your chest, where Vance feels safe, Elias interrupted, where he'll be careless, where I can find him. And then what? Marisol pressed. You ask him nicely to come back? You shame him into surrendering? He killed your family, Sheriff. He's not going to just give up. I know. Elias's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. That's why I'm going to need help. Someone who knows the territory, knows how Vance thinks, knows where he might run. He looked directly at Marisol. Someone like you. She laughed, short and bitter. You want me to help you capture him alive? After everything he's done? I want you to help me prove that justice is more than revenge. That we're better than men like Vance, not because we're softer, but because we're stronger. Strong enough to bring him back alive, to make him face what he's done, to let the law finish what he started. The law's broken, Sheriff. It's been broken for a long time. Then we fix it. We start here with this. We show that even in the worst moment, when every instinct screams for blood, we can choose something better. Elias's hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the sheer force of will it took to believe his own words. Or we prove Vance right. We prove that civilization is just a pretty lie, and violence is the only language that matters. Marisol studied him for a long moment. You're either the most idealistic fool I've ever met, or the most dangerous man on the frontier. Maybe both. Hayes cleared his throat. Boss, even if she agrees, you're still talking about leaving Salvation Creek without a proper sheriff. The town will have you. Elias pulled off his badge, the same one that had been in his hands when he'd held his dying son, and pressed it into Hayes's palm. You're a good lawman, Marshal. Better than I ever was. You understand that sometimes force is necessary. You won't hesitate when hesitation costs lives. I hesitate all the goddamn time, Hayes protested. That's why I need you to... You'll do fine. Elias squeezed his shoulder. Keep them safe. Keep them together. I'll be back when this is done. And if you're not? Elias had no answer for that. Marisol finally broke the silence. If we're doing this, and I'm not saying we are, we need to move fast. Vance and his crew are heading south, probably to Ciudad Guerrero, or one of the other border towns where they can disappear. Once they cross into the deeper territories, finding them becomes exponentially harder. Then we leave at first light, Elias said. You're really not going to carry a gun? No. You're insane. Probably. Marisol's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something close. Your wife must have been a very patient woman, Sheriff. The words hit harder than a fist. Elias swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. She was. She believed in me even when I was being an insufferable idealist. She said, his voice caught. She said the world needed more people who refused to compromise their principles, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. Elias looked back at the graves one final time. They both were. They left Salvation Creek as the sun painted the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Elias rode his gray mare, Luna, with nothing but a bedroll, canteen, and the clothes on his back. No gun, no knife, nothing that could be used to kill. Marisol rode a brown gelding that looked like it had been through several wars and won all of them. She carried weapons enough for both of them, 2 pistols, a rifle, a knife in her boot, and what Elias suspected was a derringer hidden somewhere he couldn't see. They headed south, following the trail Vance had left. The outlaw wasn't trying to hide his tracks, another sign of his arrogance, his absolute certainty that no one would dare follow. For the first 2 days, they rode in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The landscape gradually changed from the scrubland of Texas to the more varied terrain of northern Mexico, rolling hills, scattered mesquite, the occasional creek struggling to survive the autumn heat. On the 3rd night, camped beneath a sky so full of stars, it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet, Marisol finally spoke about more than logistics and trail signs. "Why'd you become a lawman if you weren't willing to carry a gun?" Elias poked at their small fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward. "I saw what guns did. When I was younger, I watched my father shoot a man over a disputed land boundary. The man died in front of his children. My father drank himself to death within a year, couldn't live with what he'd done. I learned that violence destroys everyone it touches. The victim, the perpetrator, everyone nearby." He looked up at her. "I wanted to prove there was another way. And now? Now I'm not sure what I believe anymore." The admission cost him something. "I keep thinking, if I'd been armed, if I'd reacted faster, maybe Clara and Thomas would still be alive. Maybe my principles killed them as surely as Vance's bullet did." "That's guilt talking," Marisol said firmly. "Not truth. If you'd been armed, maybe you'd have gotten them killed faster by provoking a gunfight. Maybe you'd have missed and hit a child. Maybe Vance would have killed you all. You can't know. But I could have tried. And died trying, probably." She leaned back against her saddle. "I carried a gun for years. Killed 3 men in the line of duty, all justified, all necessary. Still see their faces sometimes when I close my eyes. You think that gun made me safer? It made me a target. Every drunk cowboy with something to prove wanted to be the one who took down Marisol Vega." "Why'd you quit?" Her expression darkened. "Because after Raul died, I realized I was more interested in revenge than justice. I knew if I kept wearing that badge while hunting Vance, I'd cross lines I couldn't come back from. So I turned it in. Figured if I was going to become a monster, I'd do it on my own terms, not while representing the law." "But you didn't become a monster." "Didn't I?" She met his eyes. "I've tracked Vance across 3 territories for 18 months. I've bribed officials, broken into homes, threatened innocent people for information. I've become exactly the kind of person I used to arrest." "But you haven't killed him." "I haven't found him. There's a difference." Elias was quiet for a moment. "What will you do when we catch him?" "That depends," Marisol said slowly, "on whether you can actually pull this off. If you can bring him in alive, make him face trial, see justice done, maybe that saves us both. Maybe it proves the system can work." She paused. "And if you can't? Then I've failed, but at least I'll have tried." Noble. Stupid, but noble. She pulled her blanket tighter. "Get some sleep, Sheriff. Tomorrow we hit the first of the border towns. That's where things get complicated." But Ciudad Guerrero squatted on the border like a kicked dog that had learned to bite back. The main street was mud and refuse, the buildings a mixture of adobe and rotting wood, the air thick with the smell of horses, unwashed bodies, and desperation. They entered town in mid-morning, when the heat was already oppressive, and the locals were either too drunk or too smart to be moving around much. Elias felt eyes on him immediately, the kind of attention that came from being obviously American, obviously naive, obviously out of his element. "Stay close," Marisol murmured. "Don't make eye contact with anyone unless you want trouble. Don't react if someone insults you, and for the love of all that's holy, don't tell anyone you're a lawman." "Former lawman," Elias corrected, but he followed her lead. They hitched their horses outside a cantina called El Serpiente Roja. Inside, the air was cooler but no cleaner. A dozen men occupied the various tables, all of them looking like they'd killed at least one person and were open to adding more to the tally. Marisol approached the bar while Elias tried to make himself inconspicuous in a corner. The bartender, a massive man with scars that suggested a violent past, regarded her with the kind of wariness reserved for snakes and tax collectors. They spoke in rapid Spanish, too fast for Elias to follow with his limited vocabulary. Money changed hands. The bartender's expression shifted from hostile to merely unfriendly. He jerked his head toward the back room. Marisol returned to Elias. Vance was here 2 days ago. Him and 5 men. They spent money freely, got drunk, got in a fight that left 2 locals injured. Then they headed east, probably toward Los Santos. Who'd you pay? The bartender. He's got no love for Vance. Apparently one of the injured locals was his nephew, but he's not stupid enough to cross him without compensation. What else did he say? Marisol hesitated. That we're insane for following Vance. That the last bounty hunter who tried ended up hung from a tree with his eyes cut out. That Vance has friends in every town from here to Durango, and we'll be lucky to make it a week before someone puts a bullet in our backs. Encouraging. Realistic. She started toward the door. Come on. We've got ground to cover before... The door slammed open. 3 men entered, and even in the dim light, Elias recognized the type. Vance's men, or men cut from the same cloth. They carried themselves with the casual arrogance of people accustomed to taking what they wanted. The leader spotted Marisol immediately. His smile was all teeth and bad intentions. Well now, he said in accented English, what's a pretty thing like you doing in a shithole like this? Marisol's hand drifted toward her pistol, but Elias stepped forward before the situation could escalate. We're just leaving, he said calmly. No trouble intended. The leader's attention shifted to him. I wasn't talking to you, gringo, but now that you mention it, he stepped closer, invading Elias's space. That's a mighty fine horse you got hitched outside. The gray mare. I think I'll take her. Compensation for you wasting my time with your presence. The horse isn't for sale. Wasn't asking to buy her. The man's hand rested on his gun. See, that's the thing about you Americans. You come down here thinking your rules matter, thinking you're protected by some law that don't exist south of the border. But here? He grinned. Here, the only law is what you can take and what you can keep. The cantina had gone silent. Every eye was on them, waiting to see how this would play out. Elias kept his voice level. I don't want trouble, but I'm not giving you my horse. So we've got a choice here. We can all walk away, go about our business, and forget this happened. Or we can do this the hard way and somebody ends up hurt or dead. Your choice. The man laughed. The hard way. You're not even armed, you stupid... Marisol moved. It happened so fast Elias almost missed it. One moment she was standing beside him. The next her pistol was pressed against the leader's temple, her other hand gripping his wrist in a hold that made drawing his own weapon impossible. Here's a third option, she said softly. You and your friends leave right now, and you get to keep your brain inside your skull instead of painting it across the wall. Sound fair? The man's eyes had gone wide. His companions reached for their guns but froze when Marisol cocked her pistol, the click impossibly loud in the silence. Tell them to back down, she continued, or I decorate the floor with you and take my chances with them. I'm fast enough to kill at least one of them before they kill me. And I'm curious which one it'll be. Stand down, the leader croaked. His friends didn't move. I said stand down, you idiots! They backed toward the door, hands raised. Marisol maintained her grip until they were outside, then released the leader with a shove that sent him stumbling. Touch our horses, she called after them, and I'll hunt you down personally. Spread the word. Marisol Vega is not someone you want to fuck with. They fled. The cantina erupted in laughter, not friendly laughter, but the kind that came from seeing someone else humiliated. Elias and Marisol left quickly before the mood could shift again. Outside, Elias checked Luna carefully, making sure she was unharmed. That was reckless, he said quietly. You could have gotten us both killed. But I didn't. Marisol mounted her gelding. And now everyone in this town knows we're not easy targets. Word will spread. Might buy us some breathing room. Or make us bigger targets. Also possible. She grinned, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. But that's the frontier, Sheriff. Every choice is a gamble. At least this way we're playing with dice instead of just hoping for luck. They rode east, following Vance's trail deeper into Mexico. Los Santos was larger than Ciudad Guerrero, but not more welcoming. The streets were crowded with merchants, prostitutes, soldiers, bandits, and people who blurred the lines between all four categories. Elias felt the weight of hostile attention everywhere they went. They spent 2 days gathering information, paying for rumors, chasing false leads. Vance had been through here, that much was certain, but he'd moved on quickly. The trail led further south, into territory where even Marisol's contacts were scarce. On their third night in Los Santos, Elias sat in their shared room above a flophouse that barely qualified as shelter, cleaning trail dust from Luna's saddle, when Marisol returned looking troubled. "Problem?" he asked. "Maybe. I talked to a woman who runs one of the brothels. She says Vance spent a lot of time with one of her girls, a kid named Elena. 17, been working there 6 months." Marisol sat heavily on the room's single chair. "Elena's missing. Disappeared the same night Vance left town." Elias set down the saddle. "He took her? Or killed her? Or she ran away on her own, but the timing's suspicious." Marisol rubbed her face. "The madam says Elena was terrified of Vance. Said he liked hurting girls, liked hearing them beg. She tried to refuse him, but the madam forced her because he paid well." The anger that rose in Elias was cold and sharp, nothing like the hot rage he'd felt in the schoolhouse. This was different, calculated, controlled, but no less intense. "We need to find her," he said. "We need to find Vance," Marisol corrected. "Elena's probably dead already, and if she's not, trying to rescue her will slow us down, maybe get us killed. We find her first." "Sheriff, we find her first," Elias repeated, his voice harder now. "Because if we don't, we're no better than Vance. We're just bounty hunters looking for revenge. But if we stop, if we help someone who needs it, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's dangerous, then maybe we're actually doing what lawmen are supposed to do." Marisol stared at him for a long moment. "You're going to get us killed." "Probably, but we'll die doing the right thing. Small comfort when you're dead. Better than the alternative." She sighed, long and weary. "Fine, but we do this smart. We ask questions carefully, we don't attract attention, and if it looks like a trap, we walk away. Agreed?" "Agreed." They spent the next day following Elena's trail. It led them to the outskirts of town, to a small adobe house where the madam said Elena had family. An older woman answered their knock, Elena's aunt, who confirmed that the girl had shown up 3 nights ago, beaten nearly to death, delirious with fever from infected wounds. "She told me things," the aunt said in Spanish, her voice hollow. "Things that man did to her. Things no one should suffer." Tears tracked down her weathered face. "I wanted to go to the authorities, but Elena begged me not to. Said Vance would kill us all if she told. Said he promised to find her wherever she ran." "Where is she now?" Marisol asked gently. The aunt led them to a back room where Elena lay on a narrow bed, her face a mass of bruises, her breathing shallow and ragged. She was barely conscious, her eyes unfocused. Elias had seen enough injuries to know she was dying. The infection had spread too far, and Los Santos didn't have the medical resources to save her. He knelt beside the bed. "Elena, my name is Elias. I'm tracking the man who hurt you, Ronan Vance. Can you tell me anything about where he was going?" Elena's eyes found his, and for a moment clarity returned. "Sanctuary," she whispered. He talked about sanctuary, a place where no law could touch him." "Where?" Marisol pressed. "What sanctuary?" "Convent. Our Lady of Sorrows, where his mother—" Elena coughed, blood flecking her lips. "Where his mother died." Elias and Marisol exchanged glances. A convent was an unusual hiding place for a man like Vance. "Why there?" Elias asked. "Penance," Elena breathed. He said she died begging him to change, to be better. He goes there sometimes, when the killing weighs on him, to confess, she convulsed, her body seizing, to be forgiven. The aunt rushed forward with water, but Elena was fading fast. Her eyes met Elias's one final time. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise you'll make him pay." Elias took her hand, felt the life draining from her fingers. I promise I'll bring him to justice. Not enough. Elena's grip tightened with surprising strength. Justice is broken. It let him hurt me, hurt all of us. You need to... Her voice failed, but her eyes said what her words couldn't. She died before Elias could respond. They left Los Santos in silence, each grappling with what Elena's death meant. The trail led south and east now, toward the interior of Mexico, toward territories where American influence was non-existent and Mexican authority was a patchwork of corruption and incompetence. Our Lady of Sorrows, Marisol said on their fourth day out of Los Santos. I know it. Remote monastery in the Sierra Madre foothills. Nuns run it, tend to the poor, take in orphans. They've got a reputation for harboring anyone who seeks sanctuary, no questions asked. Even murderers, especially murderers, their whole philosophy is redemption through grace. Everyone deserves a chance to repent, no matter what they've done. Marisol's tone made clear what she thought of that philosophy. It's 3 weeks' ride from here, assuming we don't run into trouble. We'll run into trouble, Elias said. Undoubtedly. They did. The first incident came a week later in a village so small it didn't have a name. They stopped to water their horses and buy supplies and found themselves confronted by a local strongman who claimed they'd insulted him by not asking his permission to enter his territory. Elias tried to defuse the situation through conversation, offering compensation, appealing to the man's reason. It didn't work. The strongman wanted blood, wanted to make an example, wanted to prove his dominance. Marisol's hand went to her pistol, but Elias stopped her. Let me try something, he said. The strong man had brought 6 men with him, all armed, all eager for violence. Elias stepped forward, hands visible and empty. You're right, he said in halting Spanish. We should have shown respect. We should have asked permission. That was disrespectful, and I apologize. The strong man blinked, clearly not expecting capitulation. Your apology means nothing, gringo. Perhaps not, but my horse does. Elias gestured to Luna. She's worth more than anything in this village. Take her as compensation for the insult. We'll leave on foot and the matter's settled. The strong man's eyes went to Luna, evaluating. The mare was indeed valuable. Good bloodlines, well-trained, strong, worth real money. Marisol hissed a protest, but Elias ignored her. Take her, he repeated, and let us go in peace. The strong man considered for a long moment, then grinned. You're either very smart or very cowardly, gringo. I'm not sure which. He gestured to his men. Take the horse. Let them leave. Elias and Marisol walked out of the village on foot, carrying their supplies. Once they were out of earshot, Marisol exploded. You gave up your horse? Are you insane? I gave up a thing to avoid killing, Elias said calmly. Luna's valuable, but she's just property. Those men were looking for an excuse to kill us. I removed the excuse. And now we're on foot in hostile territory, weeks from our destination. We'll manage. With what? Hope and good intentions? Elias stopped walking, turned to face her. Marisol, if I'd let you kill those men, and you would have, they outnumbered us, but you're good enough to have taken at least 3 before they brought you down. What would that have accomplished? We'd be dead or running, they'd be dead or dying, and Vance would escape. This way, we're alive, we're mobile, and we're still on his trail. We're on foot, for now. 3 days later, Elias's gamble paid off. They encountered a merchant whose wagon had broken down, stranding him with a load of goods he couldn't transport. Elias helped him repair the wagon using skills learned from his father, refusing payment. The merchant, grateful and impressed, offered them passage to the next town and enough money to buy new horses. You could have robbed me, he said wonderingly. I'm alone, helpless. But you helped me instead. Why? Because that's what people should do, Elias said simply. The merchant shook his head. The frontier is full of men who take what they want. You're an anomaly, senor. I pray you survive long enough to make a difference. 2 weeks later, battered and exhausted, they finally saw Our Lady of Sorrows. The convent perched on a hillside like a bird of prey, its white walls stark against the brown landscape. A bell tower rose above the main building, and Elias could see figures moving in the courtyard, nuns going about their daily routines. If Vance is in there, Marisol said, we need a plan. We can't just walk in and arrest him. The nuns won't allow it. and his men will fight. How many men does he usually have with him? Changes, usually between 3 and 6, all experienced killers. She studied the convent through a small telescope. I see smoke from the kitchen, movement in the courtyard, but no obvious guards. Either they're inside or Vance isn't here. He's here, Elias said with certainty. Elena told us. This is where he comes to seek absolution. Then we need to be smart. You go in the front, pretend to be a traveler seeking shelter. I'll watch from a distance with the rifle. If he makes a move on you, I take the shot. No killing, Elias said immediately. Even if it's you or him? Especially then. We're bringing him back alive, remember? That's the whole point. The point is justice, Marisol corrected. If the only way to achieve that is through a bullet, then so be it. They stared at each other, the fundamental disagreement between them finally surfacing fully. I can't do this without you, Elias said quietly. But I also can't do it if you're going to kill him the first chance you get. I need your word, Marisol, your actual word. No killing unless there's absolutely no other choice. She was quiet for a long time, warring with herself. Finally, she nodded. No killing unless there's no other choice. You have my word. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is still probably going to get us both killed. Elias approached the convent alone as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. A nun met him at the gate, elderly, kind-faced, her eyes sharp with intelligence. Welcome, traveler, she said in Spanish. I am Sister Beatrice. How may we serve you? I'm seeking shelter for the night, Elias replied. And perhaps a conversation with one of your other guests, a man named Ronan Vance. Sister Beatrice's expression didn't change, but Elias saw the recognition in her eyes. What business do you have with Senor Vance? Justice. We offer sanctuary here, Senor. Whatever crimes may have been committed outside these walls, inside they are forgiven. That is our covenant. What about the crimes he'll commit after he leaves? Elias asked gently. The people he'll kill, the lives he'll destroy? Does your sanctuary extend to them as well? Sister Beatrice's face creased with pain. We cannot control what men do after they leave us. We can only offer them the chance at redemption while they're here. I don't want to hurt him, Elias said. I don't want to kill him. I want to bring him back to face trial, to answer for what he's done. Isn't that a form of redemption too, facing the consequences of your actions? That is a question for God, not for me. She studied him carefully. You're not armed. No. That's either very wise or very foolish. I've been told that a lot lately. She smiled slightly, then sighed. Senor Vance is in this chapel. He's been there since this morning, praying, or pretending to pray. I'm never quite sure with that one. She opened the gate. I'll take you to him, but I warn you, violence within these walls will not be tolerated. Our brothers are elderly, but they know how to deal with troublemakers. There won't be violence, Elias promised. The chapel was small, simple, beautiful in its austerity. Wooden pews, stone floors, an altar with a crucifix that looked centuries old, and kneeling before it, hands clasped in prayer, was Ronan Vance. He looked different than he had in Salvation Creek, thinner, older, as if the weeks of running had aged him. But when he turned at the sound of footsteps, his eyes held the same cold intelligence. Sheriff Crow, he said, sounding genuinely surprised. I must admit, I didn't expect to see you again, especially not here, especially not alive. Elias walked down the aisle slowly, stopping 10 feet from Vance. I've come to bring you back, to stand trial for the murder of Clara and Thomas Crow, and for whatever other crimes you've committed. Vance laughed. Not the mocking laugh from Salvation Creek, but something more complex, tinged with genuine amusement and perhaps a touch of respect. You tracked me all the way here, across hostile territory, without a gun, to arrest me? That's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. So I've been told. Vance stood, brushing dust from his knees. Let me save you some time, Sheriff. There will be no trial. There can be no trial. Do you know how many people I've killed? 37, by my count? Maybe more. I lose track. And do you know how many times I've been arrested? Twice. Do you know how many times I've been convicted? 0. That's going to change. Is it? Vance stepped closer, and Elias saw something new in his expression. Not mockery, but genuine curiosity. Tell me, Sheriff, what evidence do you have? What witnesses? Your deputy was blocks away when I killed your family. There's no one alive who saw me pull the trigger. You think a jury's going to convict me on your word alone? The truth of it hit Elias like a physical blow. Vance was right. Without witnesses, without evidence, any trial would be a formality ending in acquittal. But he couldn't let Vance see his doubt. Then I'll find evidence. I'll find witnesses. I'll build a case that will collapse the moment any lawyer questions it. Vance shook his head. You're chasing a phantom, Sheriff. Justice doesn't exist for men like me. It never has. The system is broken, corrupted beyond repair. We both know this. Then I'll fix it. With what? Hope? Determination? Vance's voice dropped. Let me tell you something about hope, Sheriff. It dies. It always dies. You think you're the first lawman who's tried to bring me down? You think you're the first person who believed in justice, in fairness, in the rule of law? They're all dead now. Or they've given up, or they've become like me, predators dressed in civilized clothing. Elias felt his resolve wavering, felt the weight of doubt crushing down. But then he thought of Clara's eyes, of Thomas's drawing of a horse, of Elena dying alone in a dusty room. You're coming with me, he said quietly. One way or another. You can walk or I can drag you, but you're facing judgment for what you've done. Vance smiled. There's the violence I was waiting for. You say you don't carry a gun, that you believe in justice without bloodshed. But here you are, threatening to drag me back by force. How is that different from what I do? Because I'm giving you a choice. You get to decide if this ends peacefully or not. And if I choose not to come, then I'll find another way. Such as? Elias didn't have an answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and unspoken challenges. Outside, the sun continued its descent, painting the chapel in shades of amber and shadow. Finally, Vance laughed, soft and sad and infinitely tired. You know what the tragedy is, Sheriff? I actually admire you. You're the man I might have been if the world had been different. If my mother had lived. If I'd had someone who believed in me the way your wife clearly believed in you. He turned back to the altar. But we don't get to choose who we become. The world makes us. And the world made me a monster. The world doesn't make us anything, Elias said. We choose. Every day. Every moment. You chose to kill. You chose to hurt. You chose to become what you are. And you can choose to face the consequences. Can I? Vance looked at the crucifix, his expression unreadable. Tell me, Sheriff, do you believe in redemption? True redemption? Or is it just a pretty word we use to feel better about the darkness inside us? Before Elias could answer, Sister Beatrice's voice cut through the chapel. Dinner is ready, gentlemen. Whatever business you have can wait until you've eaten. It was such a mundane interruption, so absurdly normal, that both men found themselves following the nun to the dining hall without protest. The meal was simple: bread, beans, watered wine. Vance and Elias sat across from each other, surrounded by nuns who chatted amiably about the day's work, the weather, the condition of the gardens. They treated Vance like any other guest, showing him the same courtesy and kindness. Watching them, Elias understood something he hadn't before. The nuns weren't naive. They knew exactly what Vance was. But they chose mercy anyway. They chose to see the possibility of redemption even in a man who'd murdered dozens. Was his own pursuit of justice so different? Wasn't he also choosing to believe that even broken systems could be redeemed, that even the worst situations could be transformed through principle and persistence? After the meal, as the nuns cleared away dishes, Vance leaned back in his chair. They're wasted on you, you know. What are? These ideals. This crusade. You're a good man, Sheriff Crow. Maybe even a great one. But goodness isn't enough in a world this rotten. He stood. I'm going to my room now, and tomorrow I'm leaving. If you try to stop me, my men will kill you. If you follow me, I'll lead you into an ambush. And if by some miracle you actually manage to get me back to civilization, the law you believe in so deeply will fail you one final time. He paused at the door. But for what it's worth, I am sorry about your wife and son. They didn't deserve what happened to them. Few people do. Then he was gone, leaving Elias alone with the remains of the meal and the crushing weight of everything he'd learned. Sister Beatrice approached quietly. He's a complicated man, our Senor Vance. He's a murderer. That too. She sat beside him. but he's also a man in tremendous pain. I've heard his confessions, seen his tears. He knows what he is. He hates what he is, but he can't seem to stop himself. Then he needs to be stopped. By you? Alone? Without weapons or backup or even a plan? Sister Beatrice shook her head gently. There's courage, and then there's suicide. You're venturing into the latter, I'm afraid. What would you have me do? Give up? Let him walk away? I would have you ask yourself why you're really here. Is this about justice? Or is it about grief? About trying to undo what can't be undone? She patted his hand. Your family's death is a tragedy, Senor, but throwing your life away won't resurrect them. It will only add to the tragedy. Elias looked at her, this tiny elderly nun who radiated wisdom and compassion, and felt something shift inside him. I don't know how to let this go. Then don't, but find a way to carry it that doesn't destroy you in the process. She stood. Rest tonight. In the morning, perhaps you'll see things more clearly. Elias lay awake in the small room the nuns had provided, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Everything Vance had said was true. The evidence was circumstantial at best. Any competent lawyer would get the charges dismissed. The system was broken, corrupted, incapable of delivering the justice he sought. But Elena's dying words echoed in his memory. Promise me. Promise you'll make him pay. Not bring him to justice. Make him pay. There was a difference. Somewhere in the convent, a clock chimed midnight. Elias rose, dressed, and made his way silently through the corridors. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it. Vance's room, the door slightly ajar, lamplight spilling into the hallway. Inside, Vance sat at a small desk, writing. He looked up as Elias entered, showing no surprise. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. What are you writing? A confession. Vance gestured to pages of densely written text. Every crime, every victim, every detail, names, dates, methods, everything. Elias stared. Why? Because Sister Beatrice asked me to, said it might help ease my conscience. Vance laughed bitterly. It doesn't. If anything, seeing it all written out makes it worse. Did you know I've killed children, Sheriff? Not many. Only 3, including your son. But each one haunts me more than all the adults combined. Then why did you do it? Because it was easier than letting them identify me later. Because their crying annoyed me. Because... He paused. Because I'm broken, and broken things break other things. Elias stepped closer, his eyes on the confession. If you wrote all that down, the courts would have to convict you. You'd hang. I'd never make it to trial. My men would free me, or I'd escape, or some corrupt official would make the evidence disappear. Vance set down his pen. The confession is meaningless unless there's a system capable of using it. And there isn't. There could be. Could be isn't the same as is. Vance stood, walked to the window, looked out at the dark landscape. Do you know what my mother told me before she died? She said everyone deserves forgiveness, that no sin is beyond redemption, that all I had to do was truly repent, and grace would save me. Do you believe that? I want to. God, how I want to. Vance's voice cracked. But how can there be forgiveness for what I've done? How can there be redemption for a man who's caused so much suffering? Elias found himself moved despite everything. This wasn't the arrogant outlaw from Salvation Creek. This was a man drowning in guilt, seeking absolution in a world that offered none. The first step toward redemption, Elias said quietly, is facing the consequences of your actions. Not running, not hiding, facing them. Vance turned. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, nothing means anything. They stood in silence, 2 men on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide, each seeing in the other something they'd lost or never had. Finally, Vance spoke. What happens now, Sheriff? And Elias, standing in that small room in a remote convent with a murderer who sought redemption and a confession that might mean everything or nothing, realized he had no idea. The answer came with the dawn. Elias woke to the sound of horses, too many horses, moving too fast. He was at the window before full consciousness returned, his heart already racing with the certainty that whatever was happening, it wasn't good. In the courtyard below, 5 riders circled the fountain like wolves surrounding prey. They wore the hard faces of men who'd killed often enough that it no longer registered as significant. Vance's crew had found their boss. Sister Beatrice stood at the convent's entrance, her small frame blocking their path with nothing but moral authority. One of the riders, a scarred man with eyes like chips of flint, leaned down from his saddle, speaking words Elias couldn't hear, but whose tone needed no translation. Threat, demand, violence barely restrained. Elias was out of his room and down the stairs before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He burst into the courtyard just as the scarred man raised his hand to strike the elderly nun. "Stop!" The word came out harder than Elias intended, carrying the full weight of 2 months' grief and fury compressed into a single syllable. The riders turned as one, hands drifting toward weapons, assessing this new threat and finding it wanting. "Well now," the scarred man said, his accent thick and guttural. "You must be the sheriff we heard about, the one tracking our boss without a gun." He grinned, revealing teeth gone brown with decay. "That true? You really that stupid?" "I'm here to speak with Vance," Elias said, keeping his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. "Not you. Vance don't want to speak with you. He wants to leave, and we're here to make sure that happens." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "So you got 2 choices, Sheriff. You can walk away right now, go back to wherever the hell you came from, and live. Or you can keep pushing, and we put you in the ground next to this old woman who don't know when to shut her mouth." Sister Beatrice's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Threatening a woman of faith brings a special kind of damnation, young man, one I suspect you're already well acquainted with." The scarred man's face darkened. "You think I'm scared of hell, old woman? I've been living in it since I was 10 years old. One more sin ain't gonna make a difference." "Then let me make this simple." Marisol's voice came from the convent's bell tower, calm and clear. "The man aiming at you right now, that's me. The rifle I'm holding, it's a Sharps 50 caliber. At this range, I could put a bullet through your eye before you even registered the shot. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back on your horses, ride out of here, and if Vance wants to leave, he can leave on his own terms. Not because you dragged him out like some kind of rescue party." The scarred man's eyes flicked upward, found Marisol's position, calculated odds. His companions shifted nervously, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. "You'd murder us in a holy place?" he called up. "That sits right with your conscience?" "I'd defend innocent people from armed thugs threatening violence," Marisol replied. "That sits just fine. The question is whether you want to test my aim." The standoff stretched, seconds becoming minutes, tension thick enough to choke on. Then Vance himself emerged from the convent, his expression a mixture of annoyance and resignation. "Stand down, Scar," he said quietly. "All of you. I didn't ask you to come here, and I don't need rescuing." Scar wheeled on his boss. "The hell you don't. Word is this lawman's been tracking you for weeks, that he's got some vendetta over his dead family. We figured—" "You figured wrong." Vance's voice carried an edge that made even Scar flinch. "I'm handling this my own way. Now get out of here before you make things worse. Boss, we can't just—" "You can, and you will." Vance stepped fully into the courtyard, and Elias saw something he hadn't expected: genuine authority. Despite everything, Vance commanded absolute loyalty from men who bowed to no other power. "I'll meet you in San Miguel in 3 days. If I'm not there—" He paused. "Then I'm not there. But either way, you leave now." The riders exchanged glances, uncertainty warring with years of ingrained obedience. Finally, Scar spat into the dust and remounted. 3 days, he growled. "You don't show. We're coming back. And next time, we won't be asking permission." They rode out in a thunder of hooves and displaced dirt, leaving the courtyard feeling oddly empty in their absence. Marisol descended from the bell tower, her rifle still in hand, her eyes never leaving Vance. "You could have left with them," she said. "Why didn't you?" Vance looked at Elias, something unreadable in his expression. "Because the sheriff and I were having a conversation. Seems rude to leave before it's finished." Sister Beatrice made a small sound of disgust and retreated into the convent, muttering prayers or curses. With her, it was hard to tell the difference. The 3 of them stood in the courtyard as the sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the worn stones. "The confession you were writing," Elias said. "Is it finished?" "Near enough." "Why?" "Because I want to make a deal with you." Vance laughed, short and bitter. "A deal? What could you possibly offer me that I don't already have or can't take?" "A chance." Elias stepped closer, his mind racing through possibilities, discarding bad options, settling on the only path that made sense. "You come back with me willingly. You testify to everything in that confession, and in exchange I use every ounce of influence I have to argue for clemency. Not freedom, you'd still face consequences, but maybe life imprisonment instead of hanging. Maybe a chance, however small, to actually find the redemption you claim to want." Marisol made a sound of protest, but Elias held up a hand, his eyes locked on Vance. "You said the system's broken," he continued. "Prove me wrong. Help me prove it can work. Show that even someone who's done what you've done can face justice and survive it. And if I refuse, then you walk out of here and I keep tracking you. Maybe you kill me. Maybe your men kill me. Maybe I get lucky and bring you in anyway. But either way, this ends with blood." Elias's voice dropped. "I'm tired of blood." "Aren't you?" Vance was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You know what the worst part is? I actually want to believe you. I want to believe that somewhere in this rotten world, there's still a place for justice, for mercy, for second chances." He looked directly at Elias. "But wanting doesn't make it true." "No," Elias agreed. "Acting makes it true. Choosing makes it true. Come with me. Face what you've done. Let the system try to be better than we both think it is." Marisol stepped between them, her face hard with fury. "You can't be serious. You're offering this monster a deal? After everything he's done? After Elena? After your family? After everything?" Elias interrupted. "The only way forward is to prove we're better than our worst impulses. If I kill him or let you kill him, what does that accomplish? Revenge? Satisfaction? Those fade. But if we can actually make the system work, if we can show that even impossible cases can find justice, that matters. That lasts." "It's a fantasy," Marisol spat. "The courts will never convict him on his own confession. They'll say he was coerced, that he's mentally unfit, that the confession was given under duress in a foreign country. Every lawyer from here to Washington will tear it apart." "Maybe," Elias said, "or maybe we find a prosecutor with integrity. Maybe we find a judge who actually cares about truth. Maybe nothing." Marisol's hand went to her pistol. "I've spent 18 months tracking this bastard. I've sacrificed everything for this moment, and you want me to just—" "What? Hope he gets a fair trial? Hope justice magically appears from a system that's failed every victim he's ever created?" Vance watched this exchange with something approaching fascination. "She's right, you know. The system failed you, failed her brother, failed Elena and countless others. What makes you think it won't fail again?" "Because I'm going to make it work," Elias said simply. "Because if I don't try, if I give up on the idea that law and order means something beyond whoever has the most guns, then Clara and Thomas died for nothing, and I can't accept that." The silence that followed felt heavy with the weight of impossible choices and competing convictions. Marisol's hand trembled on her pistol, decades of training warring with months of grief and fury. Vance stood perfectly still, a man balancing on the edge between two lives, two futures, two versions of himself. It was Sister Beatrice who broke the stalemate, emerging from the convent with a pack slung over her shoulder and determination written across her weathered face. "I'm coming with you," she announced. All three of them turned to stare. "Sister, that's not—" Elias began. "I'm coming," she repeated firmly. "You need a witness. Someone who can testify to the state of Senor Vance's mind when he wrote that confession. Someone who can confirm it was given freely and without coercion. I've been a nun for 47 years, and I've never lied under oath. The courts will have to take my testimony seriously." "The journey back will be dangerous," Vance said, and there was an odd note of concern in his voice. "My men won't take kindly to me being escorted back like a prisoner, even a willing one. And there are others out there, bounty hunters, opportunists, people who'd kill all of us just for the horses. Then we'll have to be careful." Sister Beatrice shouldered her pack. "I've survived cholera, bandits, and 40 years of dealing with the church bureaucracy, I think I can handle a little danger. Marisol holstered her pistol with a sound of disgust. This is insane. All of you are insane. Probably, Elias agreed, but we're doing it anyway. They left Our Lady of Sorrows 2 hours later, an unlikely convoy bound together by desperation and the thin hope that broken systems could be repaired by sheer force of will. Vance rode at the center, unarmed but not bound, a symbolic gesture of trust that made Marisol's jaw tight with suppressed rage. Sister Beatrice rode a mule borrowed from the convent, her small frame somehow radiating unshakable authority. Elias and Marisol flanked them, alert for threats from without and within. The first day passed without incident, the landscape unchanging scrubland and distant mountains. They made camp that night in a small canyon that offered some protection from wind and prying eyes. As Marisol stood watch and Sister Beatrice prepared a simple meal, Elias found himself sitting across the fire from Vance, watching flames paint shadows across the outlaw's face. "Can I ask you something?" Vance said quietly. "Depends on the question." "Why didn't you become like me? You lost everything. Your whole world ended in that schoolhouse. Most men would have strapped on a gun and hunted me down to put a bullet in my brain. But you didn't. Why?" Elias was quiet for a moment, searching for words adequate to the question. "Because Clara wouldn't have wanted that. She believed people were more than their worst moments. She believed change was possible, that redemption was real, that violence only created more violence." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I failed her in a lot of ways, but I won't fail her in this." "You're using your dead wife as a shield against becoming what you fear," Vance observed. "That's not the same as actually believing what you're saying." "Maybe not, but it gets me through the day." Elias looked up. "What about you? Your mother died wanting you to change. Why didn't you?" "Because I tried." The admission seemed to cost Vance something. "After she died, I went straight for almost 6 months. Got a job as a clerk in a freight company, rented a room, attended church on Sundays, played the part of a reformed man." His expression hardened. "Then one of my old associates showed up. Said there was a job, easy money, no risk. I told him no. He laughed, said I was playing pretend, that men like us don't change. We just hide better." "So you proved him right?" "I proved him realistic." Vance's eyes reflected firelight, cold and distant. 2 days later, the freight company discovered I'd been convicted of robbery 5 years prior under a different name. They fired me. The landlord evicted me. The church turned its back. Within a week, I was right back where I started. Except now I knew for certain that redemption was a lie people told themselves to feel better about the darkness. Sister Beatrice approached with bowls of thin stew, distributing them without comment. But after she'd retreated to her bedroll, she spoke into the darkness. "Redemption isn't a lie, Senor Vance, but it's also not magic. It requires more than wanting to change. It requires a world willing to let you change. And yes, that world often fails us, but that doesn't make the attempt worthless." "Doesn't it?" Vance's voice was soft but edged with pain. "How many times does a man have to try before he's allowed to give up? How many rejections? How many failures? How many times does the door have to slam in his face before he's justified in kicking it down instead?" "As many times as it takes," she replied simply. "Because the alternative is becoming the very thing you claim to hate." They fell into silence after that, each wrestling with their own demons. Elias took first watch, sitting on the canyon rim with his eyes on the horizon and his mind churning through everything that had been said. Below, the camp settled into uneasy sleep. Vance curled on his side like a child, Sister Beatrice snoring softly, Marisol rigid and alert even in unconsciousness. The moon rose, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. In the distance, a coyote called, lonely, haunting, utterly alone. Elias understood the feeling. "You're going to get us killed." He turned to find Marisol climbing up to join him, her movements silent despite the loose rock. "I thought you were sleeping," he said. "I don't sleep much anymore, not since Raoul died." She settled beside him, her rifle across her knees. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him, see what Vance did to him, see my sister-in-law's face at the funeral." Her hands tightened on the weapon. And now I'm escorting his killer back to civilization like he's some kind of guest instead of a rabid dog that needs to be put down. He's more than that. Is he? Or are you projecting your own need for the world to make sense onto a man who'd gut you without hesitation if he thought it served his interests? Elias didn't have a good answer for that. You gave me your word. No killing unless there's no other choice. I know what I said. Marisol's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. But sitting across a fire from him, listening to him make excuses for being a monster, watching him manipulate that nun with his sad story about trying to reform, she trailed off, breathing hard. It takes everything I have not to put a bullet in him right now. But you haven't. Not yet. They sat in silence for a while, two damaged people bound together by circumstance and the thin thread of shared purpose. Finally, Elias spoke. My wife told me once that the hardest thing in the world is extending mercy to someone who doesn't deserve it. That any fool can show kindness to the innocent, but showing it to the guilty, to the irredeemable, to the ones who've proven themselves beyond saving, that's what separates humans from beasts. Your wife sounds like she was a better person than either of us. She was. She really was. Elias's voice cracked. Which is why I have to do this her way. Because if I don't, if I give in to what I actually want, which is to beat Vance to death with my bare hands, then what was the point of her believing in me? What was the point of any of it? Marisol was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentler than he'd ever heard it. You know what the real tragedy is? You're probably right. Doing it your way is probably better, more moral, more just. But it's also going to fail. The system will fail. Vance will walk free. And you'll be left with nothing but the knowledge that you tried and failed to make a corrupt world care about truth. Maybe, Elias acknowledged, but I'd rather fail trying than succeed at becoming something I hate. Noble words. Let's see if you still believe them when we're standing in a courtroom watching Vance smile as they pronounce him not guilty. The second day brought the first real test of their fragile alliance. They were crossing a dried riverbed when riders appeared on both sides, 8 men, heavily armed, with the predatory look of bounty hunters, or worse. The leader rode forward, a massive man with a beard that reached his chest and scars crisscrossing his face like a roadmap of violence. He reined in his horse 20 yards away, his eyes moving over their small group with professional assessment. Well now, he rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. Looks like we got ourselves an interesting little party here. A nun, a woman, an unarmed man, and... His eyes fixed on Vance. Ronan Vance. I'll be damned. There's $10,000 on your head, courtesy of the governor of Chihuahua. More if we bring you in alive. Vance's expression didn't change, but Elias saw his body tense, calculating distances and odds. I'm not worth the trouble, Jackson. You know how this plays out. My crew finds out you took me. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Your crew's 3 days south, chasing a false trail I paid good money to plant. Jackson grinned. They think you're in Durango. By the time they figure out different, you'll be hanging from a noose and I'll be spending your bounty on whiskey and women. Marisol's hand drifted toward her pistol, but Elias caught her eye and shook his head fractionally. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Any fight would end badly. He's my prisoner, Elias said, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. I'm transporting him back to Texas to stand trial for murder. Jackson's laugh boomed across the riverbed. Your prisoner? You ain't even armed, boy. What are you going to do? Talk me to death? I'm going to appeal to your sense of justice. The bounty hunter's laughter cut off abruptly. My what? Your sense of justice, Elias repeated. The governor of Chihuahua wants Vance because he robbed a tax collector. That's a crime of property, not blood. But in Texas, he murdered a woman and child in cold blood. Which crime deserves punishment more? Which victim deserves justice more? A government's lost money or a family torn apart? Jackson's expression shifted, uncertainty creeping in. You're trying to con me with philosophy? I'm trying to remind you that some things matter more than money. Elias dismounted slowly, hands visible, walking toward Jackson with careful deliberation. You want $10,000? I understand that. It's good money, probably more than you've seen in years. But what does it cost you? Your honor? Your integrity? The knowledge that you put financial gain over actual justice? Honor don't feed my family, Jackson growled, but there was less certainty in his voice now. No, but it lets you look them in the eye. It lets you teach your children that some things aren't for sale. Elias stopped 10 feet from Jackson's horse. Let me take him to Texas. Let him face trial for what really matters. And when he's convicted, and he will be convicted, I'll make sure of it. You can tell yourself you did the right thing, that you chose justice over convenience. He won't be convicted, Jackson said, but it sounded like a question. Rich men like him never are. They buy their way out or lawyer their way out or just plain shoot their way out. Then help me make this time different. Help me prove the system can work. Sister Beatrice chose that moment to add her voice, her tone carrying decades of moral authority. The sheriff speaks truly, Signor. Money spent on evil purchases only damnation, but justice served purchases salvation for all involved. Jackson looked between them, warring with himself. His men shifted nervously, uncertain whether they were still planning an ambush or having a philosophical debate. Finally, Jackson spat into the dirt. You're either the bravest fool I've ever met, or the dumbest. Maybe both. He wheeled his horse around. Take him. Take him to your precious trial. But when he walks free, and he will walk free, don't come crying to me about broken systems and failed justice. The bounty hunters rode away, leaving their small group standing in the dried riverbed with the sun beating down and the weight of what had almost happened settling over them like dust. Vance was the first to speak. That was either brilliant or insane. I've been told both, Elias said, his heart still racing from the confrontation. You actually believe what you said about justice and honor? I have to. Because if I don't, then men like Jackson are right, and nothing matters except who has the most guns and the least conscience. They remounted and continued north, but something had shifted. Vance watched Elias with new calculation, as if reassessing everything he thought he knew about the man pursuing him. Marisol remained silent, but Elias caught her looking at him with an expression that might have been respect or might have been pity. He couldn't quite tell. That night, camped in the ruins of an old mission, Sister Beatrice took Elias aside while the others slept. You're carrying a heavy burden, my son, she said quietly. Heavier than any one person should bear. Someone has to carry it. Perhaps. But you should know, Vance spoke to me earlier. He asked if I truly believed he could be redeemed or if I was just playing along to spare the convent from violence. She paused. I told him the truth, that I don't know, that redemption is between him and his own conscience, but that the attempt matters more than the outcome. What did he say? That he wished he'd met someone like you or me 30 years ago, before he became what he is, before it was too late. Sister Beatrice's eyes were sad in the moonlight. I think part of him genuinely wants to change, but another part, the part that's survived this long by being ruthless, knows that change is probably impossible, and those two parts are at war inside him. Which part do you think will win? That depends on us, on whether we give him reasons to choose hope over despair, whether we prove that change is possible even in the worst circumstances. She placed a weathered hand on his arm. But you should prepare yourself for the possibility that hope isn't enough, that some men are too broken to fix, no matter how much we want to believe otherwise. The third day brought them within sight of the border. The landscape had shifted gradually back toward Texas scrubland, the air carrying familiar scents that made Elias's chest tight with something between homesickness and dread. They would cross into American territory by nightfall. But first, they had to survive the afternoon. The ambush came without warning. One moment they were riding through a narrow canyon, the next bullets were ricocheting off rocks, and men were shouting and horses were screaming. Elias hit the ground hard, his breath knocked from his lungs, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Scar and his crew had found them. Marisol returned fire immediately, her rifle barking in controlled bursts as she sought cover behind a boulder. Sister Beatrice's mule bolted, carrying the elderly nun away from the worst of the fighting. And Vance sat perfectly still on his horse, utterly calm, watching his men attack the people he'd been traveling with. Call them off, Elias shouted, scrambling behind cover as bullets chewed up the ground where he'd been standing. Vance, call them off! For a long moment, the outlaw didn't respond. He simply sat there, balanced between two choices, two futures. Then he raised his hand. "Cease fire!" The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had started. In the ringing silence that followed, Scar emerged from cover, his pistol still drawn, his face twisted with confusion. "Boss? What the hell? We're here to rescue you." "I don't need rescuing," Vance said calmly. "I'm going back to Texas voluntarily." "You're what?" Scar looked like he'd been slapped. "You're going back to hang? After everything we've done? Everywhere we've run?" "I'm going back to face trial." "There's a difference." "Like hell there is," Scar's gun swung toward Elias. "This bastard's got you confused, playing mind games. Let me put a bullet in him, and we can—" "If you kill him," Vance interrupted, his voice colder than Elias had ever heard it, "I will personally gut you and leave you for the vultures. The sheriff lives. So does the woman and the nun. That's not negotiable." Scar stared at his boss like he was looking at a stranger. "They've broken you. They've gotten inside your head and broken you." "Maybe," Vance acknowledged. "Or maybe I'm finally thinking clearly for the first time in 20 years. Either way, my decision stands. You can ride with us back to Texas if you want, or you can take the money I've stashed in San Miguel and disappear. But you will not harm these people." The standoff stretched, tension vibrating in the air like a plucked string. Scar's finger tightened on the trigger, and Elias saw the moment when the man decided to pull it anyway, to kill the sheriff who'd corrupted his boss, and damn the consequences. Marisol's rifle shot took Scar in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying. He went down hard, cursing, blood spreading across his shirt. The other members of Vance's crew raised their weapons, but Vance's voice cracked like a whip. "Stand down! All of you, stand down right now!" They hesitated, caught between years of loyalty and the shocking sight of their leader defending the people who should have been their enemies. Slowly, reluctantly, weapons lowered. Vance dismounted and walked to where Scar lay clutching his wounded shoulder. He knelt beside his old friend, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but you were going to kill him, and I can't let that happen." "Why?" Scar's voice was thick with pain and betrayal. "What's he got that's worth throwing away everything we built?" "Hope," Vance said simply. "He's got hope that broken men can be fixed and broken systems can work. And I need to know if he's right." He stood, addressed his crew. "I'm riding north to face trial. Any man who wants to come with me, knowing that means probably hanging, is welcome. Any man who wants to take his share and run, do it now. But nobody touches the sheriff or his companions. Are we clear?" One by one, the men nodded. Some looked relieved, others confused, all of them uncertain about this new version of their leader. Scar alone remained defiant, his eyes promising future violence even as blood seeped between his fingers. They bandaged Scar's wound and left him there with supplies and a horse, his eyes burning holes in their backs as they rode away. The remainder of Vance's crew, now down to 3 men, fell in behind their boss, a strange honor guard escorting him toward judgment. That night, camped just south of the border, Elias finally allowed himself to believe they might actually make it. Texas was less than a day's ride. Civilization, law, the possibility of actual justice, all of it within reach. Marisol joined him at the fire, her expression troubled. "You know this doesn't change anything, right? Even with Vance cooperating, even with the confession and Sister Beatrice's testimony, the courts could still fail us." "I know. And you're okay with that? With going through all this just to watch him walk free?" Elias was quiet for a moment, staring into flames that reminded him of another fire, another life. "No, I'm not okay with it, but I'm willing to accept it, because the alternative is giving up on everything I believe in, and that's a death I'm not ready to die." Vance approached, his shadow falling across them both. "Can I join you?" They nodded, making space. The outlaw settled with a weariness that went bone deep, the kind that came from carrying guilt for too long. "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach Texas," he said. "About the trial, the testimony, all of it, and I realized something." He looked directly at Elias. "Even if I hang, even if this ends with a rope around my neck, it'll be the first honest thing I've done in 20 years. The first time I've actually faced the consequences of my choices instead of running from them." "You could still run now," Marisol observed. "Your men would help you. We couldn't stop all of you." "I know, but I don't want to anymore." Vance's voice was quiet, but certain. I'm tired of running. Tired of being this thing I've become. If death is what it takes to finally stop, then... He shrugged. At least it'll be over. Sister Beatrice materialized from the darkness like a small, avenging angel. Death is not redemption, Senor Vance. It's merely an ending. True redemption requires living with what you've done and choosing differently going forward. Assuming the courts let me live. Assuming many things, she agreed, but assumption is not certainty. And certainty is not truth. We walk forward in faith that our efforts matter, even when the outcome remains unclear. They sat together in the firelight, four unlikely companions bound by circumstance, and the desperate hope that broken things could be repaired through will and principle. Around them, Vance's remaining crew maintained watch, silent witnesses to a transformation none of them fully understood. In the morning, they would cross into Texas. They would ride toward judgment, toward trial, toward the uncertain promise of justice in a world that had proven itself capable of immense cruelty. But for now, in this moment, they simply sat together and let the fire warm them against the desert night's cold. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human struggles and human hopes. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called again, still lonely, still searching, but no longer quite so alone. They crossed the Rio Grande at dawn, the water low enough that the horses barely needed to swim. The moment Elias felt American soil beneath Luna's hooves again, something shifted in his chest. Not relief exactly, but a strange mixture of hope and dread. They were home. And now everything he'd promised, everything he'd believed, would be tested against the grinding machinery of law and politics and human corruption. Deputy Hayes was waiting for them at Salvation Creek's boundary, a dozen armed men flanking him, their rifles trained on Vance and his remaining crew. The deputy's face was a mixture of shock and something harder when he saw his former boss riding alongside the man who'd murdered his family. "Boss," Hayes called out, his voice tight, "you want to tell me what the hell is going on here?" Elias raised his hand in a gesture of peace, dismounting slowly. "Stand down, Marshal, all of you. Vance is surrendering voluntarily to face trial." "Voluntarily?" Hayes spat the word like a curse. "He killed Clara and Thomas, and you're treating him like some kind of guest?" "I'm treating him like a prisoner who deserves due process, the same due process we give everyone else." Elias approached his deputy, keeping his voice low. "I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking, but we do this by the book, Marshal. We do it right." Hayes's jaw worked, fury and confusion warring across his weathered features. "The book didn't save your wife. The book didn't save your son. Why the hell are you still clinging to it?" "Because it's all we have," Elias said quietly. "Because the moment we abandon it, we become them. We become the thing we're fighting against." The deputy stared at him for a long moment, then lowered his rifle fractionally. "You've changed, boss. I don't know if it's for better or worse, but you've definitely changed. We all change. The question is whether we control how, or whether circumstances do it for us." Elias turned back to Vance. "Come on, let's get you locked up properly before half the town decides to lynch you." They processed Vance at the sheriff's office with a formality that felt surreal given everything that had happened. Hayes took down the confession in precise script, while Sister Beatrice testified to its voluntary nature. Marisol provided her own statement about tracking Vance across Mexico, and through it all, the outlaw sat calmly, answering questions with an honesty that seemed to unsettle everyone in the room. "You're admitting to 37 murders?" Hayes asked, his pen hovering over the page. 38, actually. I forgot about a gambler in El Paso 2 years back. Caught him cheating, put a knife in his ribs. Seemed important at the time." Vance's tone was conversational, almost casual. "You want details on each one, or just the general count?" "Details," Elias said firmly. "Every victim deserves that much." So Vance talked. For 3 hours, he methodically recounted each killing, names when he knew them, locations, methods, justifications that sounded increasingly hollow as the list grew longer. Some were claimed self-defense, others profit, a few simple convenience. By the time he finished, even his own men looked sick. Hayes set down his pen with shaking hands. "Jesus Christ. Don't invoke his name for me," Vance said quietly. "If there's a heaven and a hell, I know which one I'm bound for. No amount of confession changes that." Then why confess at all? Hayes demanded. Because the sheriff asked me to. Because I'm tired of lying. Because maybe, just maybe, facing the truth is the first step towards something resembling peace. Vance looked at Elias. Though I suspect peace and the hangman's noose arrive at roughly the same time. They locked him in the town's single jail cell, a cramped space barely large enough to stand in, with iron bars and a straw mattress that had seen better decades. His 3 remaining crew members were placed in a makeshift holding area in the storage room, protesting loudly until Marisol's rifle convinced them cooperation was their healthiest option. That night, Elias sat in his old office, staring at paperwork that documented the impossible. A complete confession to multiple murders, corroborated by witnesses, given voluntarily by a man who should have been running for his life. It was everything a prosecutor could want. It was also, he suspected, completely worthless. Marisol entered without knocking, carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like it might have been coffee in a previous life. She handed him one and settled into the chair across from his desk. "You know this won't hold up in court," she said without preamble. "I know." The confession was given in Mexico, in a religious sanctuary, after weeks of what any lawyer will call psychological coercion. Add in Sister Beatrice's testimony, a nun vouching for a man's spiritual state, and it becomes even easier to dismiss as religious theater rather than legal evidence. "I know," Elias repeated. "Then why did we do all this? Why drag him back if you knew it was futile?" Elias took a sip of the terrible coffee, using the moment to organize his thoughts. Because futile and worthless aren't the same thing. Because even if the system fails, even if Vance walks free, we'll have proven something important. That it's possible to pursue justice without becoming the thing you're fighting. That mercy isn't weakness. That pretty philosophies don't resurrect the dead, Marisol interrupted harshly. "I've followed you this far, Sheriff. I've watched you extend compassion to a man who deserves nothing but a bullet. I've held my fire when every instinct screamed to kill him. But I need you to be honest with me right now. Do you actually believe the courts will convict him? Or are you just hoping against hope that maybe this time the system works?" Elias met her eyes, saw the desperation there, the need for something to believe in. "I don't know. I genuinely don't know if this will work, but I know what happens if we don't try. We become the very thing we're fighting against. We prove that violence is the only language that matters, and I can't accept that. I can't or won't. Both." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them both. Finally, Marisol spoke again, her voice softer now. "Your wife must have been an incredible woman to inspire this kind of faith in broken systems." She was. She believed in people's capacity for change even when all evidence suggested otherwise. Used to drive me crazy. Elias smiled at the memory, painful and sweet. I'd come home frustrated about some drunk cowboy who kept causing problems, and she'd say, maybe he just needs someone to believe in him. And damn if she wasn't usually right. What would she think of this? Of you extending that same faith to her killer? The question hit harder than Marisol probably intended. Elias was quiet for a long time before answering. "I think she'd be proud that I'm trying, and I think she'd be terrified that I'm going to fail." "You are going to fail," Marisol said bluntly. "The question is whether you can live with that failure." Before Elias could respond, Hayes burst through the door, his face flushed with anger. "We've got a problem. Word spread about Vance being here. Half the town's outside demanding we hand him over for a proper hanging." Elias was out of his chair immediately, grabbing his hat. "How many?" 20, maybe 30. Dutch Williams is leading them, drunk as usual and twice as stupid. They've got rope." The 3 of them emerged from the office to find a crowd gathered in the street, torches burning despite the late hour, voices raised in angry chorus. Dutch Williams stood at the front, his face red with alcohol and righteous fury, a coiled rope in his meaty hands. "Give us the murderer, Sheriff," Dutch bellowed. "He killed your family, for Christ's sake. Why are you protecting him?" Elias stepped into the street, hands visible and empty, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Because I'm a lawman, and lawmen don't hand prisoners over to mobs." "You're not the sheriff anymore," someone shouted from the back. "You gave the badge to Hayes, remember? You got no authority here." "Then I'm speaking as a citizen," Elias replied calmly, "as someone who lost everything to Ronan Vance. And I'm telling you that murdering him in the street makes us no better than he is. We have a system. Let it work. The system's broken. Dutch took a step forward, and the crowd moved with him like a single organism. It's been broken since before we were born. Rich men get away with everything while poor folks hang for stealing bread. You know this is true, Sheriff. You've seen it. I have seen it, Elias agreed. Which is why we need to prove it can be better. Vance has confessed to everything. We have witnesses, documentation, a complete record of his crimes. If we give that to a proper court, if we let justice work the way it's supposed to, he'll walk free. Dutch's voice cracked with emotion. Just like every other rich, smart bastard who knows how to work the system. We've all seen it happen. The guilty go free and the innocent suffer. Well, not this time. Not in my town. The crowd surged forward, and for a moment Elias thought they'd simply rush past him, overwhelm Hayes and Marisol, and tear Vance apart in his cell. But then Sister Beatrice stepped between them and the jail, her tiny frame radiating an authority that made even Dutch Williams pause. "You want to murder a man in cold blood," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "You want to drag him from his cell and string him up like an animal. And you think this makes you better than him? You think this serves justice?" "He deserves to die," someone yelled. "Perhaps he does," Sister Beatrice agreed. "But who decides? You? In the heat of anger and alcohol, or a court of law with evidence and testimony and the deliberation that separates civilization from chaos?" She swept her gaze across the crowd. "I have spent 47 years ministering to the broken and the damned. I have heard confessions that would make your blood run cold. And I have learned that the moment we abandon our principles in pursuit of revenge, we become the very monsters we claim to oppose." "Pretty words from someone who didn't lose family to that bastard," Dutch muttered, but there was less certainty in his voice now. "I lost my brother to bandits when I was 17, Sister Beatrice said quietly. "They raped and murdered my sister. They burned our village. I survived by hiding in a well, listening to my family die above me. So do not tell me I don't understand loss." The crowd fell silent, shocked by the revelation. "I wanted them dead," she continued. "I dreamed of killing them, of making them suffer as they'd made us suffer. And when they were finally caught and hanged, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no closure, just emptiness. Because revenge, I learned, is an empty cup that can never be filled." She paused. Justice though, real justice. The kind that requires patience and faith and the willingness to let systems work, even when they're imperfect. That offers something revenge never can. It offers the possibility of meaning in senseless tragedy. Dutch's rope hung loose in his hands now, the fire gone from his eyes. What if the system fails? What if he walks free? "Then we try again," Elias said. "We find better prosecutors, better judges, better laws. We work to fix what's broken instead of abandoning it entirely. Because the alternative is chaos. The alternative is every man deciding for himself what justice means, and that path leads to more blood, more death, more grief." The crowd wavered, anger giving way to uncertainty. Hayes stepped forward, his hand resting on his pistol, but his voice calm. "I'm the sheriff now," he said, "and I'm telling you all to go home. Vance will stand trial. If the courts convict him, he'll hang. If they don't—" He paused, clearly struggling with what came next. "If they don't, then we face that when it happens. But we do it legal. We do it right. Or I'll arrest every man here for attempted murder." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. Dutch was the last to leave, standing in the street with his useless rope, his eyes hollow with defeated rage. "You're a fool, Sheriff Crow," he said quietly. "A good man, maybe, but a fool. That bastard's going to walk free, and when he does, every death that follows will be on your conscience." He walked away into the darkness, leaving Elias standing in the empty street with his convictions and his doubts warring for supremacy in his chest. The trial was set for 3 weeks later in the circuit court 2 counties over. Elias spent those weeks gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, building a case that he hoped would be impossible to dismiss. He tracked down survivors of Vance's other crimes, documented patterns of violence, assembled a timeline that painted a picture of systematic predation spanning years. Marisol helped, her investigative skills proving invaluable. She found records Elias would have missed, Witnesses too terrified to come forward without her particular brand of persuasion. And through it all, she maintained her silent vigil, watching Vance's cell with eyes that promised violence should he attempt escape. Vance himself seemed almost serene in captivity. He spent his days reading books borrowed from Sister Beatrice, writing letters he never sent, occasionally speaking with Elias about matters both profound and mundane. Their conversations took on an odd intimacy born of proximity and shared purpose. "Do you hate me?" Vance asked one evening, his voice drifting through the bars of his cell. Elias looked up from the paperwork he'd been reviewing. "I don't know. I thought I did. I wanted to. But mostly I just feel tired. Tired of carrying this anger. Tired of the whole mess. That's probably healthier than hate. Hate requires energy." Vance shifted on his thin mattress. "Can I ask you something? If the trial goes the way you fear, if I'm acquitted despite everything, what will you do?" "I don't know." "Will you kill me yourself, take the justice you couldn't get through legal means?" Elias was quiet for a long moment, examining that possibility with the honesty it deserved. "No, I don't think I could. It would mean everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, was for nothing. It would mean Clara was wrong about me. And if I kill again after walking free, if my first act as a free man is to murder some innocent person just to prove that I can, would you kill me then?" "Why are you asking me this?" "Because I need to know if you're genuine or just another idealist who'll crumble the moment reality doesn't match his expectations." Vance's eyes glinted in the lamplight. "I've known a lot of good men, Sheriff. Men with principles and convictions and faith in humanity. You know what happened to most of them? They either died or they became like me. The world ground them down until there was nothing left but cynicism and survival instinct. Maybe I'll be different. Maybe. Or maybe you'll just be another corpse that believed too hard in things that don't exist." The words hung between them, neither quite a threat nor quite a warning, but something in between. Elias returned to his paperwork, but the question lingered, unanswered and unanswerable. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a man named Theodore Blackwood, a career attorney from Austin with silver hair and a reputation for losing high-profile cases. He arrived in Salvation Creek a week before the trial, reviewed Elias's evidence with the enthusiasm of a man inspecting a dead horse, and delivered his assessment with brutal efficiency. "We'll lose," he said flatly, sitting in Elias's office with the confession spread before him. "The confession won't hold up. Any competent defense attorney will get it excluded as coerced. The witnesses are either dead, disappeared, or too terrified to testify. And your star witness," he gestured toward the jail, "is a nun who claims she witnessed a spiritual transformation. The jury will eat her alive." "Then what do we do?" Elias demanded. "We go through the motions. We present what we have. We make a good show of it, and we prepare for the inevitable acquittal." Blackwood's expression wasn't cruel, just weary. "I've been doing this for 23 years, Sheriff. I know what justice looks like, and this isn't it. So you're giving up before we even start?" "I'm being realistic. There's a difference." Marisol, who'd been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "What if we found new evidence? Something that directly connects Vance to murders with living witnesses?" "Such as?" "There's a woman in San Antonio. Saw Vance kill a merchant 2 years ago, saw his face clearly, ran before he could silence her. I found her last week. She's willing to testify." Blackwood's interest flickered, then died. "Defense will argue mistaken identity. 2 years is a long time. Memory fades. Witnesses become unreliable." She described a scar on Vance's left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. "How many men have that exact marking?" "Unless you can prove it's unique, defense will argue coincidence." Blackwood stood, gathering his papers. "I admire your optimism. I really do. But I've seen this play out too many times. Rich, smart criminals don't hang. They hire good lawyers, exploit every technicality, and walk free, while the system pats itself on the back for providing due process." After he left, Elias and Marisol sat in silence, the weight of impending failure pressing down on them. "He's right, you know," Marisol said finally. "We're going to lose." "Maybe. Definitely. And when we do, I'm putting a bullet in Vance's brain. I don't care about your principles or your dead wife's philosophy. Some men need to die, and Vance is one of them." Elias looked at her, saw the absolute conviction in her eyes, and knew she meant every word. If you do that, I'll have to arrest you. If I do that, I'll already be riding for the border. You'll never catch me. I'll try. I know. She smiled sadly. You're predictable that way. It's almost endearing. The trial began on a Tuesday morning under skies gray with the promise of rain. The courthouse was packed with spectators, locals hungry for drama, journalists hoping for scandal, and a smattering of Vance's victims or their families present to witness justice they didn't believe would come. Vance himself looked almost dignified in borrowed clothes that actually fit, his hair combed, his expression calm. He could have been a banker or a professor rather than a confessed murderer. The transformation was unsettling. The defense attorney was everything Blackwood had feared, young, sharp, ambitious, with the kind of aggressive competence that turned courtrooms into battlefields. His name was Marcus Thorne, and he made his intentions clear in his opening statement. The prosecution will try to convince you that Ronan Vance is a monster, Thorne began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. They will present a confession allegedly given in a foreign country under circumstances that can only be described as coercive. They will parade witnesses whose memories are clouded by time and trauma. They will appeal to your emotions, your sense of outrage, your desire for simple answers in a complicated world. He paused for effect, letting the words sink in. But this is not a trial of emotions. This is a trial of facts. And the facts, ladies and gentlemen, will show that there is no credible evidence linking my client to the crimes alleged. The confession was obtained through psychological manipulation in a religious setting where my client's mental state was compromised. The witnesses are unreliable at best, perjurers at worst, and the prosecution's case rests entirely on the word of a man, he gestured toward Elias, who has admitted he's pursuing this case out of personal vendetta rather than professional duty. The first day went badly. Blackwood's presentation was competent but uninspired. His witnesses easily rattled under Thorne's cross-examination. The merchant from San Antonio who'd identified Vance became confused under questioning, admitted the lighting had been poor, conceded that 2 years was a long time to remember a face clearly. Sister Beatrice testified about the confession, her testimony dignified and unwavering. But Thorne's cross-examination was surgical. Sister, you say my client gave this confession freely, but you also say he came to your convent seeking spiritual guidance, correct? Yes. And in your religion, confession is part of the process of receiving absolution, is it not? It can be. So when my client wrote down these alleged crimes, he was doing so in a religious context, seeking forgiveness from your deity, not giving legal testimony, correct? Sister Beatrice's eyes narrowed. He knew what he was writing. He knew it could be used against him. Did he? Or was he a broken man seeking spiritual comfort, manipulated by a sheriff with a vendetta into creating false evidence? Thorne's voice dripped with false sympathy. Tell me, sister, have you ever encountered a person so desperate for redemption that they'd confess to crimes they didn't commit? Not in this case. But you've encountered it in general. She hesitated. Yes. Thank you, sister. No further questions. Elias testified on the second day, walking through the events in Salvation Creek with painful precision. He described finding Clara and Thomas, described the confrontation with Vance, described the outlaw's admission of guilt. But under Thorne's cross-examination, even these certainties became murky. Sheriff Crow, you were blocks away when the shootings occurred, correct? Yes. So you didn't actually see my client pull the trigger? No, but please answer yes or no. You didn't see him pull the trigger? No. And when he allegedly admitted guilt to you, he was surrounded by his armed crew in a hostile confrontation where saying the wrong thing could have resulted in further bloodshed, correct? That's not yes or no, Sheriff. Was it a tense situation where words might have been misunderstood or taken out of context? Elias gritted his teeth. It was tense, but I know what I heard. What you think you heard, perhaps. Under extreme emotional distress, having just discovered your family murdered, your judgment perhaps not at its clearest. My judgment was fine. Was it? Then why did you spend the next 2 months pursuing my client across Mexico instead of working through proper legal channels? Why did you take the law into your own hands if your judgment was so sound? The question hung in the air, damning and unanswerable. Elias felt the jury's eyes on him, saw doubt creeping across their faces. On the third day, Thorne called his own witnesses, character references who testified to Vance's generosity, his intelligence, his fundamental decency beneath a rough exterior. They were lies, obvious lies, but they were presented with such confidence that they carried weight. Then Thorne called Vance himself to the stand. The outlaw took his oath with apparent sincerity, his demeanor humble and earnest. Under Thorne's gentle questioning, he painted a picture of a man who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, whose reputation as an outlaw was exaggerated, whose confession had been extracted through psychological torture. "They kept me at that convent for days," Vance said, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "The nun was kind, but the sheriff, he never let up, always asking questions, always suggesting I was guilty, always implying that confession was my only path to redemption. I was exhausted, confused, desperate for the harassment to end, so I told them what they wanted to hear." "And the crimes you confessed to?" Thorne asked. "Did you commit them?" "Some of them, yes. I'm not a perfect man. I've broken laws, hurt people, done things I regret. But murder?" He looked directly at the jury. "I'm not a murderer. I've never killed anyone in cold blood. And I certainly didn't kill that woman and child in Salvation Creek." Blackwood's cross-examination was aggressive, but ultimately ineffective. Vance had an answer for everything, delivered with just the right mix of contrition and indignation. By the time he stepped down from the stand, half the courtroom looked ready to acquit him on the spot. The closing arguments came on the fourth day. Blackwood did his best, appealing to logic and evidence, asking the jury to look past Vance's performance and see the pattern of violence documented in the case. But Thorne's closing was masterful, a symphony of reasonable doubt and emotional manipulation that left the prosecution's case looking threadbare and vindictive. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, their verdict was written on their faces before the foreman ever spoke. Elias felt Marisol's hand tighten on his arm, heard Sister Beatrice's sharp intake of breath, saw Hayes's shoulders slump in defeat. "On the charge of murder in the first degree," the foreman read, his voice steady, "we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted, some in outrage, some in triumph, most in simple shock that the system had once again failed to deliver justice. Elias sat frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard, unwilling to accept that everything he'd done, everything he'd sacrificed, had led to this moment. Vance stood, composed and dignified in victory, accepting his attorney's congratulations with the grace of a man who'd never doubted the outcome. His eyes found Elias across the courtroom, and in them was something that might have been triumph or might have been apology. Elias couldn't tell which and wasn't sure it mattered. The judge's gavel fell, bringing order to chaos. "Mr. Vance, you are free to go. This court stands adjourned." Free to go. 3 words that destroyed everything Elias had built, everything he'd believed, everything he'd told himself about justice and systems, and the possibility of redemption through law rather than violence. He watched Vance walk toward the courtroom doors, watched freedom beckon, watched everything Clara had believed in die before his eyes. And in that moment, Elias Crow stood at the edge of an abyss, looking down into darkness that promised simple answers to impossible questions. Marisol was already moving, her hand on her pistol, her eyes locked on Vance's retreating back. Hayes moved to intercept her, but she was faster, angrier, more committed to the violence Elias had spent months trying to prevent. The shot rang out before Elias could react, echoing through the courthouse like judgment deferred but not denied. But the bullet didn't find Vance. Elias had moved without thinking, his body acting on instinct that bypassed conscious thought. He'd thrown himself between Marisol and her target, felt the impact punch through his shoulder, spinning him sideways as pain exploded white-hot through his entire left side. He hit the courthouse floor hard, the world tilting sickeningly, voices erupting around him in a chaos of shouts and screams. "No!" Marisol's voice, raw with fury and disbelief. "Why would you—" Hayes was on her immediately, wrestling the pistol from her grip while she fought like a wildcat, her eyes blazing with betrayed rage. "He deserves to die. You know he does. Why are you protecting him?" Elias couldn't answer. Blood was spreading across his shirt in a dark stain, and breathing had become a complicated exercise in managing agony. He was dimly aware of Sister Beatrice kneeling beside him, her small hands applying pressure to the wound, her voice murmuring words he couldn't quite hear over the ringing in his ears. Then Vance was there, his face hovering above Elias with an expression of complete shock. "You took a bullet for me. After everything, you actually took a bullet for me." "Couldn't let her—" Elias gasped, each word costing him. "Couldn't let her become what she was fighting." "I'm not worth saving, you idiot." Vance's voice cracked. "I'm not worth any of this. That's not your choice to make." The doctor arrived, a harried man named Morrison who had been in the courtroom watching the trial, and immediately began barking orders. They got Elias onto a table in the judge's chambers, Morrison cutting away his shirt to expose the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, which Morrison declared simultaneously lucky and concerning, depending on what it had hit on its journey. "He's going to need surgery," Morrison said, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Real surgery, in a proper facility. This is beyond what I can do with courthouse supplies." "Nearest hospital is 2 days' ride," Hayes said, his face gray with worry. "He'll never make it." "Then I improvise." Morrison looked at Sister Beatrice. "I'll need your help, sister, and someone strong to hold him down. This is going to hurt like hell, and I can't waste laudanum putting him under." What followed was the longest hour of Elias's life. Morrison dug through the wound, searching for fragments and damage, while Sister Beatrice held instruments and Vance, of all people, kept Elias pinned to the table. The outlaw's face was inches from his own, close enough that Elias could see genuine anguish in those cold eyes. "Stay with me, Sheriff," Vance kept saying, a mantra against the pain. "Stay here. Don't you dare die to save a man who doesn't deserve it." Elias wanted to respond, wanted to explain that it wasn't about deserving, that it had never been about deserving. But the pain was too great, the world too distant, and darkness kept pulling at him with seductive promises of escape from agony. When Morrison finally finished, declaring the surgery successful but the prognosis uncertain, Elias drifted into unconsciousness with Vance's voice still echoing in his ears, repeating those same words over and over like a prayer from a man who'd forgotten how to pray. He woke 3 days later in a bed that smelled of antiseptic and old blood. The room was small, unfamiliar, lit by weak sunlight filtering through curtains that had seen better decades. His shoulder was a solid mass of pain, but it was manageable pain, the kind that suggested healing rather than dying. Marisol sat in a chair beside the bed, her face haggard, her eyes red from crying or lack of sleep or both. When she saw him wake, something broke in her expression. "You stupid, noble, idiotic bastard," she said, her voice thick. "Why did you do that?" "Had to," Elias managed, his throat raw. "You would have killed him, would have destroyed yourself. He deserves to die." "Maybe, but not by your hand, not that way." He tried to sit up, failed, settled for turning his head to look at her properly. "Where is he?" "Gone. Released from custody the moment the verdict came in. His lawyer had him out of the courthouse within an hour." Marisol's hands clenched into fists. "He's free, Elias. Everything we did, everything we sacrificed, and he just walked away." The words should have hurt worse than the bullet wound, should have shattered what remained of Elias's faith in systems and justice and the possibility of redemption through law, but instead he felt only a strange, quiet certainty. Did he really just walk away? Marisol's expression shifted to confusion. "What do you mean?" "Vance, after I got shot, did he leave immediately or did he stay?" "He stayed. Helped hold you down during the surgery, sat with you for 2 days straight, barely moved even when his lawyer kept insisting they needed to leave." She paused. "Why does that matter?" "Because it means something changed. The Vance we brought back from Mexico would have walked away the moment the verdict came in. He wouldn't have cared about some sheriff who'd hunted him, but he stayed." Elias closed his eyes against a wave of pain. That means it wasn't all for nothing. "He's still free. He's still unpunished. How is that not for nothing?" Before Elias could answer, the door opened and Sister Beatrice entered carrying a tray with soup and bread. She set it down, checked Elias's bandages with practiced efficiency, then fixed Marisol with a look that could have stripped paint. "You need to sleep," she told the younger woman. "You've been sitting here for 3 days straight. The sheriff's not going to die in the next few hours. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see him walking out of that courtroom, free and smiling. Marisol's voice cracked. I failed my brother. I failed Elena. I failed everyone Vance ever hurt. You failed no one, Sister Beatrice said firmly. You pursued justice through proper channels. That the system failed is not your fault. Then whose fault is it? Everyone's and no one's. Systems are built by people, and people are flawed. But that doesn't make the attempt worthless. She gestured to Elias. This man took a bullet to prevent you from becoming a murderer. Do you understand what that means? He valued your soul more than his own life. The least you can do is honor that by not descending into the darkness he saved you from. Marisol stared at Elias for a long moment, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I wanted to kill him so badly. I still want to kill him. The rage is eating me alive. I know, Elias said softly. Believe me, I know. But rage is easy. Rage is simple. What's hard is choosing something better even when every instinct screams for blood. How do you do it? How do you not hate him with everything you are? I do hate him. I hate what he did, what he took from me, what he represents. But I hate what hatred does to people more. I saw it destroy my father. I've seen it destroy entire towns. And I refuse to let it destroy me or you or anyone else I care about. Sister Beatrice nodded approvingly. Wisdom born of suffering. The most painful kind, but also the most valuable. She handed Marisol a cup of water. Drink, sleep. When you wake, perhaps the world will look different. Marisol took the cup but didn't drink. Where did he go? Vance? No one knows, Sister Beatrice replied. He left the courthouse, collected his horse, and rode out of town without a word to anyone. His crew scattered. Some say he went south, back to Mexico. Others claim he headed north toward the territories. All we know for certain is that he's gone. He'll kill again, Marisol said with absolute conviction. Men like him don't change. He'll kill again, and those deaths will be on our conscience for letting him walk free. Elias wanted to argue, wanted to insist that change was possible, that their efforts had mattered, but he couldn't lie to her, couldn't pretend certainty he didn't feel. So instead he simply said, maybe, or maybe not. We'll see. Recovery was slow and painful. The wound had damaged muscles and tendons, leaving Elias's left arm weak and unresponsive. Morrison said full function might return with time and exercise, or it might not. The uncertainty was frustrating but somehow appropriate. Everything about this entire ordeal had been uncertain, unresolved, suspended between hope and despair. Hayes visited frequently, bringing news from Salvation Creek and updates on the wider world. The trial had made newspapers across 3 territories, with opinions sharply divided between those who saw it as justice served and those who saw it as justice denied. Elias's shooting had added another layer of controversy, with some calling him a hero and others a fool. Dutch Williams is saying you got what you deserved, Hayes reported during one visit, his expression sour. Says anyone stupid enough to take a bullet for a murderer deserves to die. Dutch has always been a pessimist, Elias replied mildly. He's not wrong, though. What you did was... Hayes struggled for words. I don't know if it was brave or stupid. Maybe both. Definitely both, Elias agreed. But it was also necessary. Marisol was about to destroy herself. I couldn't let that happen. Even if it meant saving the man who killed your family. Especially because it meant that. Because if I'd let her kill him, what would that have proven? That violence wins? That the law means nothing? That we're all just animals pretending it's civilization? Elias shifted in bed, wincing at the pain. No. I had to prove something different, even if it cost me. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. You've changed, boss. You're harder now, but somehow also, I don't know. More certain? Not more certain, more accepting. There's a difference. Elias looked out the window at the town beyond. I used to think justice was something you could achieve if you just tried hard enough, followed the rules, believed in the system. Now I know it's something you fight for every day, knowing you'll probably lose, but fighting anyway because the alternative is worse. That's a hell of a bleak philosophy. It's a realistic one. 4 weeks after the shooting, Elias was finally strong enough to travel. They returned to Salvation Creek in a wagon, Elias's wounded shoulder making riding impossible. The town greeted them with mixed reactions, some welcoming, some hostile, most simply confused about what had happened and what it meant. The office was exactly as he'd left it, Hayes having maintained everything with his usual efficiency. But something felt different now, changed in ways Elias couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't home anymore. It was just a building, a place where a version of himself he barely recognized used to work. "You gonna want your badge back?" Hayes asked, clearly hoping the answer was no. "Keep it. You're a better sheriff than I ever was." "That's not true." "It is. You understand that sometimes violence is necessary. You won't hesitate when hesitation costs lives. That's what this town needs." Elias looked around the office, seeing ghosts in every corner. "What I need is something different." "What's that?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Marisol had been staying in a boarding house on the edge of town, keeping to herself, processing her rage and grief in solitude. Elias found her there one evening, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and crimson. "You leaving?" she asked without preamble. "Eventually, you?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to track Vance down and finish what we started. But another part—" She trailed off, staring at the horizon. "Another part is just tired. Tired of hunting. Tired of hating. Tired of carrying all this weight." Elias settled into the chair beside her, his shoulder protesting the movement. "You know what Clara used to tell me? She'd say that revenge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The hatred hurts us more than it ever hurts them. Your wife was very wise." "She was. Didn't always make her right, but she was wise." He paused. "I've been thinking about Elena, about what she asked me to do." "Make him pay?" "Yeah. And I've been wondering if maybe I did. Not the way she wanted, not the way you wanted, but maybe in a more important way." Elias turned to look at Marisol. "Vance walked out of that courthouse a free man, but he's not the same man who walked in. Something changed in him. Maybe it was the trial. Maybe it was the confession. Maybe it was me taking a bullet for him. But something shifted." "So what? He's still free. He's still unpunished." "Is he? He has to live with what he's done now. Really live with it, not bury it or justify it or run from it. Every morning he wakes up knowing he's a murderer who got away with murder. That's its own kind of prison." Marisol was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to believe that matters. I want to believe that conscience and guilt are real punishments. But I keep thinking about all the people he killed, all the lives he destroyed, and how he's out there somewhere living free while they're in the ground. I know. I think about that too. Every day." Elias looked at his damaged shoulder, the arm that might never work properly again. "But I also think about the alternative. If we'd killed him, if we'd taken justice into our own hands, what would that have made us? Better than him? Or just different versions of the same thing? Maybe some things are worth becoming a monster for. Maybe. But I don't think this was one of them." They sat together as darkness fell, two broken people trying to find meaning in failure, trying to believe that doing the right thing mattered, even when the outcome was wrong. Around them, Salvation Creek settled into its evening rhythms, dogs barking, children being called home, the saloon piano starting its nightly performance. Life continued, indifferent to their struggle, uncaring about their pain. And somehow, that was both crushing and comforting. The letter arrived 6 weeks after the trial, delivered by a writer who refused to say where it had come from or who had sent it. Hayes brought it to Elias's small room, his expression uncertain. "It's from him," Hayes said simply. Elias didn't need to ask who. He took the letter, noted the careful handwriting, the quality paper that suggested Vance still had money. For a long moment he considered burning it unread, but curiosity won out. The letter was longer than he expected, filling 3 pages with dense text. Vance's handwriting was surprisingly elegant, the words carefully chosen. "Sheriff Crow," it began, "I've started this letter a dozen times and failed each time to find adequate words. How does one thank a man for taking a bullet meant to prevent murder? How does one apologize for destroying someone's world? The answer, I suspect, is that one doesn't. Some actions transcend language. But I'll try anyway. You were right about the system being broken. The trial was a farce, my acquittal a mockery of justice. I sat in that courtroom listening to my lawyer lie with such confidence and skill that even I almost believed him. I watched the jury's faces as they convinced themselves that reasonable doubt was the same as innocence. I saw justice fail exactly as you feared it would. And yet, something happened during those weeks in your custody, during that trial. During the moment you threw yourself between me and a bullet, you had every reason to let hit its target. Something I can't quite name but can't deny either. You showed me that principles matter even when they fail. That choosing the harder path has value beyond the outcome. That mercy isn't weakness, but the strongest possible stance a person can take. I don't know if I've changed. I don't know if change is even possible for someone like me, but I know that I can't go back to what I was. Can't return to the casual violence, the easy cruelty, the certainty that nothing matters except survival and power. You broke something in me, Sheriff, and I don't know if what replaces it will be better or worse. I'm leaving the territories, heading somewhere I can't be found. Not to escape justice. We both know justice already had its chance and failed. But to escape myself. To see if distance and time can do what conscience couldn't. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Your wife and son are still dead. Elena is still dead. The 38 others I killed are still dead. Nothing I do will change that. But perhaps I can ensure there isn't a 39th. That's not redemption. That's not even close. But it's all I have to offer. You asked me once if I believed in redemption. I still don't have an answer. But I believe in you, Sheriff Crow. I believe that men like you, stubborn, idealistic, willing to sacrifice everything for principles that don't pay dividends, I believe you're the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. You're the thin line that holds. And I believe that your wife and son would be proud of you, not for catching me, not for winning, but for remaining yourself despite every reason to become something else. Thank you for that example, and I'm sorry it cost you so much. The letter wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Elias read it 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning, new admissions, new possibilities. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of his small desk alongside Clara's last letter and a drawing Thomas had made of a horse, all 3 artifacts of a life that felt simultaneously distant and painfully present. Hayes was waiting when Elias emerged from his room. What did it say? That maybe we didn't fail completely. That maybe something we did mattered. Elias looked at his deputy, saw the skepticism there, understood it. Or maybe he's just telling me what I want to hear. Hard to say with someone like Vance. You going to try to find him? No, he's made his choice. If he keeps his word and doesn't kill again, then maybe this whole mess had a point. If he doesn't, Elias shrugged, wincing at the pain the motion caused. Then we'll deal with it when it happens. And if he kills someone tomorrow, if the next newspaper reports Ronan Vance murdered a family in Colorado or New Mexico or wherever the hell he went, then I'll know I was wrong, and I'll have to live with that. Elias met Hayes' eyes. But I can live with being wrong about believing in redemption easier than I can live with being right about abandoning it. Marisol's reaction was more visceral when Elias showed her the letter the next day. She read it once, her face darkening with each paragraph, then threw it back at him with enough force that the pages scattered. It's bullshit, she spat. Pretty words from a pretty monster who wants you to feel good about letting him walk free. He's manipulating you even now, even from wherever he's hiding. Maybe, Elias acknowledged, gathering the pages, or maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe taking that bullet actually meant something. You want to know what that bullet meant? It means you're crippled in one arm for the rest of your life. It means a murderer walks free. It means the system you believed in failed spectacularly and publicly. That's what it means. It also means you didn't become a killer, that the woman I traveled with, the one who could have descended into the same darkness that claimed Vance, chose something different. That matters, Marisol. She turned away, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. I still want to kill him. Every day I wake up wanting to kill him. The rage hasn't gone away. I know, I feel it too. Probably always will. Elias stood, his damaged shoulder protesting. But feeling rage and acting on it are different things. We get to choose which one defines us. I'm not as strong as you think I am. Yes, you are. You proved it when you didn't pull that trigger a second time, when you've had a dozen opportunities since and haven't taken them. He placed a hand on her shoulder. You're stronger than you know, stronger than rage, stronger than grief. She turned, and he saw tears streaming down her face. Then why does it hurt so much? Why does doing the right thing feel like dying? Because the right thing usually does? Because easy answers are comforting lies, and hard truths are exactly that. Hard. He pulled her into an awkward, one-armed embrace. But we survive it. We carry it. And maybe someday it weighs a little less. They stood together in the fading light, two damaged people holding each other up through sheer force of will, refusing to let darkness claim what remained of their humanity. Outside, Salvation Creek continued its indifferent existence, neither knowing nor caring about their struggle. But they cared. And somehow, that had to be enough. Sister Beatrice left a week later, returning to her convent with promises to pray for them all. She took Elias aside before departing, her small hands gripping his with surprising strength. "You did well, my son," she said. "Better than you know. Better than you'll probably ever realize." "Did I?" Vance walked free. The system failed. Everything I believed in collapsed. The system failed, yes. But you didn't. You held to your principles when it would have been easier to abandon them. You chose mercy over vengeance. You proved that civilization is more than words on paper. It's the choices we make when no one is watching and nothing guarantees success. She smiled. Your wife chose well when she married you. I wish she was here to see how it ended. She is here. In you. In every choice you make that reflects what she believed. Sister Beatrice released his hands. And it hasn't ended, Sheriff. This is just one chapter in a much longer story. What comes next is up to you. What if I don't know what comes next? Then you figure it out as you go. That's what faith is. Moving forward when the path is unclear, trusting that the direction matters more than the destination. She rode away on her borrowed mule, a tiny figure disappearing into the vast landscape, leaving Elias standing in the street with her words echoing in his mind. That night, Elias sat in his small room with lamplight casting shadows across walls that had witnessed too much pain. He pulled out paper and pen, intending to write something. To Clara, to himself, to the future he couldn't quite envision, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself thinking about Vance's letter, about Sister Beatrice's farewell, about Marisol's ongoing struggle with rage, and his own damaged shoulder that served as a constant reminder of choices made and prices paid. The system had failed. That was undeniable. Vance had walked free despite overwhelming evidence of guilt, proving that wealth and intelligence could circumvent justice with relative ease. Everything Elias had believed about law and order had been tested and found wanting. And yet, he was still alive. Marisol hadn't become a murderer. Vance had written a letter suggesting genuine change, however uncertain. Sister Beatrice had found meaning in their struggle. And somewhere, perhaps, the effort itself had mattered in ways that couldn't be measured by courtroom verdicts. Maybe that had to be enough. Maybe faith wasn't about certainty, but about choosing to believe that efforts mattered even when outcomes disappointed. Maybe justice wasn't a destination, but a direction, something you moved toward knowing you'd never fully arrive but moving anyway because the alternative was worse. Elias set down his pen, the paper still blank. Some things couldn't be written, only lived. Some questions had no answers, only the daily choice to keep asking them. Outside his window, Salvation Creek slept beneath stars that had witnessed countless tragedies and countless triumphs, indifferent to both, eternal and unchanging. And Elias Crow, former sheriff, damaged idealist, stubborn believer in broken systems, made a decision. Tomorrow, he would start rebuilding. Not the town, not the law, but himself. He would find a new purpose, a new way forward that honored everything he'd lost while acknowledging everything he'd learned. He would prove that failure wasn't final, that principles survived disappointment, that the man Clara had believed in could persist even in a world determined to prove her wrong. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But it would be his choice, made freely, made consciously, made in full knowledge of the cost and the uncertainty of the outcome. And that, he thought, as sleep finally claimed him, that might actually be enough. 3 months passed like water through cupped hands, present, felt, but ultimately impossible to hold. Elias spent those months in a strange limbo between his old life and whatever came next, his damaged shoulder healing slowly while his damaged faith healed slower still. He helped Hayes when needed, worked odd jobs around Salvation Creek, and tried to ignore the hollow place where purpose used to live. Then the telegram arrived. Hayes brought it to him on a Tuesday morning, his face grim. "You're not going to like this." The message was brief, sent from a marshal's office in Santa Fe. 3 people dead in a boarding house. 2 men, 1 woman, shot execution style. Witnesses described the killer as educated, well-dressed, cold as winter ice. One survivor reported the killer had apologized before pulling the trigger, said something about old debts coming due. Ronan Vance was killing again. Elias read the telegram 3 times, each reading hitting harder than the last. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd hoped, everything he'd told himself about change and redemption and the power of mercy. All of it crumbling to dust in his hands. "There's more," Hayes said quietly. Second telegram came an hour later. 4 dead in Albuquerque, similar pattern, and word from the territorial governor's office that they're forming a special task force to hunt him down. He paused. "They want you to lead it." "Why me?" "Because you know him better than anyone. Because you tracked him once already. Because—" Hayes struggled for words. "Because they think you've got a personal stake that'll keep you motivated." Elias set down the telegram, his hands remarkably steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Tell them no." "What?" "Tell them no. I'm not hunting Vance." Hayes stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Boss, he's killing again. Everything you feared, everything Marisol warned you about, it's happening. And you're just going to sit here?" "I'm not sitting anywhere. I'm making a choice." Elias stood, walked to the window, looked out at the town that had become both prison and sanctuary. "If I hunt him now, if I dedicate myself to tracking him down and bringing him to justice or death, what does that prove? That I was wrong? That mercy is weakness? That violence is the only language that matters? It proves that you were willing to admit a mistake and correct it. Or it proves that I never really believed what I claimed to believe, that my principles were just pretty words that collapsed the moment they were tested." Elias turned to face his deputy. "I took a bullet to save Vance from becoming Marisol's victim. I did that because I believed, still believe, that how we pursue justice matters as much as whether we achieve it. If I abandon that now, what was the point of any of it? The point was to give him a chance, and he's proven he doesn't deserve it." Hayes' voice rose with frustration. "People are dying, boss. Real people with families and futures. And you're letting it happen because you're too stubborn to admit you were wrong about him." "Maybe I am stubborn. Maybe I am wrong. But I'm not hunting him." Elias's voice was quiet but absolute. "Send word to the governor that I respectfully decline. They'll find someone else." Hayes left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, Elias allowed himself to feel the full weight of his decision. 7 people dead. Maybe more by now. And he was choosing principle over action, philosophy over results. Clara would have understood. Or she would have been horrified. He honestly wasn't sure which, and that uncertainty cut deeper than any bullet wound. Marisol appeared that evening, the telegram clutched in her hand like evidence of betrayal. She didn't knock, just walked into his room with eyes blazing and fury radiating from every line of her body. "You're not going after him," she said flatly. "No." "Even though he's killing again. Even though every death from this point forward is blood on your hands." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Marisol laughed, harsh and bitter. "You want to talk about fair? Elena died unfairly. My brother died unfairly. Your wife and son died unfairly. And now 7 more people are dead unfairly because you believed a pretty letter from a monster who told you what you wanted to hear. He said he was changing. He said, he lied." She threw the telegram at him. "Or he tried and failed, which amounts to the same thing. People are dying, Elias. Doesn't that matter to you?" "Of course it matters. But hunting him down won't bring them back, won't prevent the next killing or the one after that. It'll just prove that violence is the answer to violence, and the cycle continues forever." Marisol stepped closer, her voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. "I'm going after him, with or without you, with or without anyone's permission, and when I find him, I'm putting a bullet in his brain, not for justice, not for redemption, but because some men are too broken to fix and too dangerous to leave breathing. Then you'll be the killer you were trying not to become." "Maybe, but at least I'll have stopped him." She turned toward the door, then paused. You saved me from becoming a murderer once. Took a bullet to do it. Well, I'm telling you now, I'm going anyway. And this time, there's nothing you can do to stop me." She left, and Elias knew she meant every word. Knew that somewhere in the territories, a confrontation was building that would end with either Vance dead or Marisol destroyed or both. And he was choosing to let it happen. The choice should have felt noble, principled, right. Instead, it just felt like cowardice dressed in philosophical clothing. That night, unable to sleep, Elias walked to the cemetery where Clara and Thomas lay beneath markers he'd carved himself. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light, making the world look clean and simple in ways it never actually was. He sat between the graves and spoke to the dead, knowing they wouldn't answer but needing to speak anyway. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," he said quietly. "I don't know if refusing to hunt Vance makes me principled or just weak. I don't know if mercy is strength or stupidity. I don't know anything anymore except that I miss you both so much it feels like dying." The silence that answered was profound and unhelpful. "You'd tell me to follow my conscience," he continued, addressing Clara's marker. "You'd say that outcomes don't determine morality, that we're judged by our choices, not our results. You'd probably quote something wise and make it sound simple, even though it's impossibly complicated." He touched Thomas's marker, traced the crude horse he'd carved there. "And you'd just want to know if we could go fishing. If the world could be simple enough for an 8-year-old to understand." The tears came then, hot and bitter, mourning not just his family, but the version of himself who'd believed the world made sense, who'd thought justice was achievable through proper channels, who'd never imagined he'd be sitting in a graveyard debating whether letting a killer run free was noble or negligent. "Tell me what to do," he whispered to the night, to the dead, to whatever forces governed a universe cruel enough to put him in this position. "Please, just tell me what to do." The answer came not from the graves, but from behind him, a voice he hadn't heard in months but recognized immediately. "You already know what to do. You're just afraid to do it." Elias turned to find Ronan Vance standing at the cemetery gate, his face pale in the moonlight, his hands empty and visible. The outlaw looked thinner than before, haunted in ways that went beyond simple guilt. "How did you find me?" Elias asked, his voice surprisingly calm given the circumstances. "I've been watching the town for 2 days, waiting for the right moment." Vance stepped closer, moving slowly, clearly aware that despite his empty hands, he was a target. "I got your message, the one you didn't send. Ronan Vance is killing again. Saw it in every newspaper from here to Colorado." "Are you? Killing?" Vance's laugh was broken glass. "No, but someone wants people to think I am. Someone who knows my methods, my patterns, my habits. Someone who's using my reputation to cover their own murders." "Why should I believe you?" "You shouldn't. I'm a confessed murderer who walked free from a trial that should have seen me hang. Why would you believe anything I say?" Vance stopped 10 feet away, respect for boundaries or acknowledgement of danger. "But I need your help anyway, because whoever's doing this, they're good. Good enough that even I'm starting to doubt my own innocence. And if I'm doubting it, the law certainly won't believe me." Elias stood slowly, his hand instinctively moving to where a gun would be if he carried one. "You want me to help you prove you're innocent of murders you didn't commit, while ignoring the 38 you confessed to committing? I want you to help me stop whoever's actually doing this before Marisol or some bounty hunter puts a bullet in me for crimes I didn't commit. There's a certain irony there, don't you think? Dying for the wrong murders when I've already escaped justice for the right ones? This is insane." "Yes, but it's also true." Vance pulled something from his pocket, a piece of paper which he handed to Elias. "I was in Montana when the Santa Fe killings happened, playing cards with the sheriff and 3 witnesses who will testify to it. I was in Wyoming during Albuquerque, working as a ranch hand under a different name, but a dozen people can place me there." Elias examined the paper in the moonlight. It contained names, dates, details that could be verified or disproven with enough effort. "Why come to me? Why not go to the authorities with this?" "Because the authorities want me dead or imprisoned, preferably dead. They're not going to investigate whether I'm actually guilty of new crimes when they're still angry I escaped punishment for old ones." Vance's voice carried a desperate edge. "You're the only person who ever believed I could change. The only one who took my letter seriously. The only one who might actually care about truth more than convenience. I never said I believed you'd changed. I said I hoped you would. There's a difference. Hope's a start, more than anyone else is offering. Vance took a step closer. I know what you're thinking, that this is a trick, that I'm manipulating you again, that even if I'm telling the truth about these specific murders, I'm still guilty of dozens more. All of that's valid. All of that's reasonable. But people are dying, Sheriff. Real people. And the real killer's out there laughing while everyone hunts me. Elias wanted to refuse. Wanted to tell Vance to leave, to turn himself in, to face whatever justice or injustice the system provided. Wanted to maintain his principled distance from a situation that could only end badly, regardless of the outcome. But then he thought about the 7 dead. Thought about the real killer using Vance's reputation as cover. Thought about Marisol hunting a man who might actually be innocent of the crimes driving her vengeance. If I help you, he said slowly, it's not because I believe you've changed. It's not because I forgive you or think you deserve my help. It's because those 7 people deserve justice, and justice requires finding the actual killer. I'll take whatever motivation you're offering. And when this is done, when we've found whoever's actually responsible, you turn yourself in. New crimes, old crimes, everything. No more running, no more hiding. You face what you've done. Vance was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to help you catch a killer just so you can ensure I hang for different murders? I'm asking you to prove you meant what you wrote in that letter, that you actually want to be better, that redemption means more to you than survival. And if I refuse, then you leave now, and I go back to believing you're exactly what everyone says you are, a liar, a manipulator, a monster who uses pretty words to escape consequences. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications and impossible choices. Finally, Vance nodded. All right. We find the real killer. Then I turn myself in and face whatever comes. You have my word. Your word's not worth much. I know, but it's all I have to give. They started hunting the next morning, Elias and Vance riding out of Salvation Creek together like a partnership forged in hell and tempered in desperation. Hayes tried to stop them, argued that Elias was making another terrible mistake, but ultimately couldn't prevent a civilian from making his own choices, however stupid. Marisol was harder to manage. She'd already left town, tracking rumors of Vance sightings, following a trail of blood and vengeance that would inevitably lead to confrontation. Elias sent telegrams ahead to every marshal's office between Salvation Creek and Santa Fe, warning them that the Vance killings might not be what they appeared, asking them to delay any action until he arrived. Most ignored him. A few responded with variations of mind your own business. One, from a marshal named Catherine Brooks in a town called Redemption Ridge, simply said, "Come quick. I think you're right." They reached Redemption Ridge 4 days later, horses exhausted, both men worn thin by constant vigilance and the strange tension of their alliance. Marshal Brooks met them at her office. A woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be fooled by surfaces. "You're the sheriff who let Vance walk," she said to Elias without preamble. "And you're the killer everyone's hunting," she said to Vance. "This should be interesting." "You said you think I'm right," Elias replied. "About what?" "About someone impersonating Vance. Come with me. I'll show you." She led them to the town's small mortuary, where 2 bodies lay on tables covered by sheets. Brooks pulled back the first sheet, revealing a man in his 40s with 3 bullet holes in his chest. "Killed 2 nights ago," she explained. Witnesses said the killer was well-dressed, educated, cold. Apologized before shooting. Classic Vance signature based on the trial reports. She pulled back the second sheet. "This one was killed an hour later, different location, same pattern, same signature." "I don't understand," Elias said. "What am I supposed to see?" Brooks pointed to the bullet wounds. "Different caliber guns. The first victim was killed with a .44, the second with a .45. Your average killer sticks with one weapon, but someone trying to impersonate a killer they've only read about in newspapers? They might not realize that consistency matters." Vance leaned closer, examining the wounds with professional interest. "I've only ever used a .44. Anyone who'd actually studied my work would know that. But someone who was just copying the general pattern," he looked at Brooks. "You're good." "I'm thorough. There's a difference." She covered the bodies again. I've been a marshal for 26 years. I've seen a lot of killers, and I can tell you this, these murders feel wrong, too theatrical, too perfectly aligned with what people expect from the infamous Ronan Vance. Real violence is messier than this. So we're looking for someone who wants people to think Vance is killing again, Elias said. But why? What's the purpose? Could be a lot of reasons. Maybe someone with a grudge against Vance wants to see him hang for crimes he didn't commit. Maybe it's someone who wants to use his reputation as cover for their own murders. Maybe it's someone who's obsessed with him, trying to emulate his legend. Brooks shrugged. Motivation's less important than stopping them. Any leads? 1. There's been a man in town asking questions about Vance. A lot of questions. Where he operated, who his victims were, what his methods looked like. Seemed like a journalist at first, but journalists don't usually carry 2 different caliber pistols. Where is he now? Left yesterday morning, heading south, toward a place called Miller's Crossing. Small town, barely 50 people, remote enough that nobody would notice a few more bodies. Brooks fixed Elias with a hard stare. If you're actually trying to stop this, that's where you need to go. But I'm warning you, take Vance into that town and you might start a lynch mob that'll string you both up. Then we'll have to be careful. They rode out within the hour, pushing hard toward Miller's Crossing with the sun climbing toward noon and the weight of urgent purpose driving them forward. Vance rode in silence for the first few miles, then finally spoke. Thank you for believing me, or at least for being willing to investigate before assuming guilt. Don't thank me. I'm doing this for those 7 dead people, not for you. Still, it's more than I deserve. Vance paused. Can I ask you something? If we catch this person, if we prove I'm innocent of these specific murders, will that change how you see me? Will it matter that I'm not as bad as people currently think, even if I'm still guilty of terrible things? No, you're still a murderer, still guilty of Clara and Thomas and 36 others. This doesn't change that. Then why are you helping me prove my innocence? Elias was quiet for a long moment, examining his own motivations with the honesty they deserved. Because every victim deserves justice, even if that means saving a guilty man from being blamed for crimes he didn't commit. It's not about you, it's about them. It's about maintaining the principle that truth matters even when truth is inconvenient. You're a strange man, Sheriff Crow. So I've been told. They reached Miller's Crossing as afternoon faded toward evening, the town appearing like a mirage in the desert heat. It was smaller than Brooks had suggested, barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around a dry well, the kind of place people ended up when they'd run out of other options. The stranger was obvious immediately, a well-dressed man in his 30s sitting outside the general store with a notebook and an air of studied casualness. He looked up as they approached, his eyes widening slightly when they landed on Vance. Then he smiled. Well, he said, standing slowly, Ronan Vance in the flesh, and Sheriff Crow, if I'm not mistaken. This is quite the reunion. Who are you? Elias demanded. My name is Samuel Thorne, brother to Marcus Thorne, the attorney who defended Mr. Vance so brilliantly at trial. His smile widened. Though I suppose defended is generous, my brother ensured a guilty man walked free, and I've been trying to correct that mistake ever since. Understanding crashed over Elias like cold water. You're the one killing people, framing Vance. Framing suggests deception. I prefer to think of it as delayed justice. Samuel's hand moved toward his coat, and Elias knew he was going for a weapon. My brother sold his soul to get you acquitted, he said to Vance. Destroyed his own conscience to put a monster back on the streets. He killed himself 6 weeks after the trial. Couldn't live with what he'd done. I'm sorry, Vance said quietly. Are you? Or is that just another manipulation? Samuel's hand emerged with a pistol. A .45, Elias noted. It doesn't matter. You're going to die here, along with anyone stupid enough to defend you, and the law will thank me for cleaning up their mess. Killing innocent people and blaming Vance doesn't bring your brother back, Elias said, his voice calm despite the gun pointed at his chest. It just creates more victims, more grief, more people like you carrying pain that drives them to terrible choices. Spare me the philosophy, Sheriff. You had your chance to do this right. You could have killed him in Mexico, could have let the woman shoot him at trial, could have done a dozen things that would have saved lives, but you chose principle over pragmatism. Well, I'm choosing pragmatism. He dies today. The shot came not from Samuel, but from behind them. Marisol had found them, her rifle tracking Samuel with the cold precision of a professional. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying. She advanced slowly, her rifle never wavering, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Drop the other gun. I know you're carrying a .44 as well. Drop it now, or the next shot goes through your skull." Samuel complied, wincing in pain, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. "You're going to shoot an innocent man to save a killer? That's your idea of justice?" "No one here is innocent," Marisol said flatly. "Not him, not you, probably not me either. But you've been murdering people and using Vance's reputation to cover it. That stops now. So you're taking him in? Going to ensure he faces trial for the people I killed while he walks free from the ones he actually murdered?" Samuel laughed bitterly. "The system's broken. We all know it. I was just trying to fix it the only way that works." "By becoming worse than what you were fighting?" Elias stepped forward, his eyes on Samuel. "Your brother died because he couldn't live with compromising his principles. And you're honoring that by compromising yours, by killing innocent people?" "They weren't innocent. They were criminals. Bad people who deserved what they got. And who made you judge of that? Who gave you the right to decide who lives and dies?" "The same person who gave Vance that right. Nobody. We took it ourselves. The only difference is, I'm honest about it." Marisol's rifle never wavered. "Elias, move away from him. I'm ending this now." "Don't." Elias placed himself between Marisol and Samuel, the same way he'd placed himself between her and Vance months ago. "Don't become this. Don't prove him right about broken systems and vigilante justice. He's killed 7 people, and killing him won't bring them back. It'll just add one more body to the count." Elias looked at her, saw the war raging behind her eyes. "We take him in. We present evidence. We let the system try to work, even if it's broken, because the alternative is chaos. The alternative is justice. No, the alternative is revenge dressed in justice's clothing, and revenge has never fixed anything." They stood frozen in that moment, 3 people bound together by violence and principle, and the desperate need for something to make sense in a world determined to prove sense was illusion. Then Vance spoke, his voice quiet but absolutely certain. "She's right, Sheriff. Sometimes the system is too broken to fix. Sometimes the only answer is direct action." He looked at Marisol. "Do it. Kill him. Then kill me. End this entire mess the way it should have ended months ago." Marisol's finger tightened on the trigger, and Elias saw her making the calculation. 2 shots. 2 deaths. Clean and final and utterly devastating to everything he'd tried to build. "Please," he said softly, speaking to Marisol but meaning it for everyone. "Don't do this. Don't prove that mercy is weakness. Don't prove that every principle I've held is just naive fantasy. Don't make Clara's faith in humanity a lie." "Your wife's dead," Marisol said, but there was less certainty in her voice now. "Her faith died with her." "No, it lives in me, in you, in every choice we make to be better than our worst impulses. In every moment we choose principle over convenience, mercy over revenge, hope over despair." Elias's voice cracked. "I know the system's broken. I know it failed. But we don't fix it by abandoning it. We fix it by refusing to let it break us." The silence stretched impossibly long. Then Marisol lowered her rifle, her entire body shaking with the effort of restraint. "I hate you," she said to Elias, tears streaming down her face. "I hate that you're right. I hate that mercy matters more than justice. I hate that I can't just pull this trigger and end it." "I know. I hate it too sometimes." Elias turned to Samuel. "You're under arrest for 7 counts of murder. And if the system fails again, if you walk free like Vance did, then maybe I'll finally accept that it's broken beyond repair. But until then, we do this right." They bound Samuel's wounds and secured him for transport. Marshal Brooks arrived 2 days later with a proper warrant and jurisdiction, taking custody of a man who'd thought he was fixing the world by breaking it further. The evidence was overwhelming. 2 different weapons, witnesses who could place him at multiple scenes, and eventually a full confession born of righteous certainty that he'd done nothing wrong. His trial was swift and brutal. Unlike Vance, Samuel Thorne had no expensive attorney to create reasonable doubt. Unlike Vance, his victims had witnesses and evidence and a clear trail of guilt. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes before returning a verdict that surprised no one. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to hang within the month. Elias attended the execution, feeling neither satisfaction nor vindication, only a profound weariness with a system that could convict one killer while absolving another based on nothing more substantial than legal competence and resources. Marisol stood beside him, watching Samuel drop through the trap door with eyes that held no triumph, only recognition that justice was arbitrary at best. Afterward, they walked through the town that had served as the backdrop to Samuel's conviction, neither speaking, both processing the complicated emotions of watching the system work exactly as designed while knowing it had failed them months earlier. "It's not fair," Marisol finally said. "Vance murdered 38 people and walks free. Samuel killed 7 and hangs. Where's the justice in that?" "There isn't any, not in any absolute sense." Elias stopped walking, turned to face her. "But Samuel got caught because we investigated, because we cared about truth, because we refused to accept easy answers. That's not the justice we wanted, but it's the justice that was possible, and it's better than no justice at all." "Is it? I'm not sure anymore." "Neither am I. But I know that giving up on the attempt makes it certain we'll never get there." Vance had been staying in a boarding house on the edge of town, waiting to fulfill his promise. When Elias found him, the outlaw was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that had no business being so beautiful after so much ugliness. "It's time," Elias said simply. "I know." Vance stood slowly, straightened his clothes with the care of a man preparing for something significant. "You kept your word. Proved I was innocent of Samuel's crimes. Now I keep mine." "You don't have to. You could run. Disappear again. I couldn't stop you." "No. But you'd try. And I'm tired of running." Vance looked at Elias directly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about redemption requiring facing consequences, about how the choices we make define us more than the outcomes. And I think I'm ready to stop running from what I am." They walked to the marshal's office together, an odd pair bound by mutual respect born from shared suffering. Hayes was waiting there, having ridden in for the execution and stayed for whatever came next. His eyes widened when he saw them together. "Boss, what's happening?" "Ronan Vance is turning himself in," Elias said. "Full confession to 38 murders. No lawyer, no defense, just truth and whatever consequences follow." Hayes looked between them, searching for the trick, the angle, the manipulation. "This is real?" "This is real," Vance confirmed. He extended his hands for the manacles Hayes produced, accepting them without resistance. "I killed 38 people over 12 years. I deserve to hang for every one of them. And if the system works the way it's supposed to, that's exactly what'll happen." "And if it doesn't?" Hayes asked. "If some lawyer gets you off again? Then I turn myself in again. And again, however many times it takes until justice catches up with me." Vance looked at Elias. "Your wife believed people could change. I want to prove she was right, even if it kills me." The second trial was nothing like the first. No expensive